Yo, what's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. So I'm going to get right into it. This House committee started, and I'm already late to the show, so I'm just going to see if anybody wants to join here and watch this live with us.
Office involved FBI people. The last chapter in this real-life drama. You must relentlessly pursue the facts and the evidence. Senator Johnson and I will do the same and willing to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Grassley. Senator Johnson.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the Select Committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify about my personal knowledge of and experience with federal agencies being weaponized against U.S. citizens. My first investigation, Senator Grassley has just described.
A little bit better audio going on here. Here we go.
Ultimately revealed the extensive editing of then FBI Director James Comey of his July 5th, 2016 statement that exonerated Secretary Clinton regarding her use of a private email server for official business. The edits were clearly made to downplay the seriousness of her actions. It is important to note those partisan edits were made by the same cast of characters in the FBI that would initiate and drive the corrupt Russian-Trump collusion investigation. During our investigation of the FBI's involvement in the Russian collusion hoax, Senator Grassley and I uncovered and made public highly partisan text messages between FBI employees Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. Strzok's December 15, 2016 text, quote, "Think our sisters have begun leaking like mad. Scorned, worried, and political, they're kicking into overdrive, has never been given the attention it deserves." In 2022 interview with Jeff Gerth, Strzok said he now believes, quote, that it is more likely the text came not from the CIA, but from senior levels of the U.S. government or Congress. Who might those leakers be? Why aren't reporters who received the leaks outraged at being fed false information? And why haven't they blown the whistle on the leakers? Why didn't the mainstream media robustly investigate how they were all duped? The answer is they weren't duped. They were complicit in creating and fostering the political turmoil our country has been experiencing over the last 6 years. Those leaks were a key ingredient in the most destructive, political, dirty trick in U.S. history: the creation and promotion of the false Russia-Trump collusion narrative. To be most effective, however, that narrative relied on coordination between government actors and the media. And the left had allies in the FBI. Unable to verify the Steele dossier, the FBI offered Christopher Steele $1 million to provide verification. By December 2016, the FBI knew they had investigated Steele's primary subsource as a Russian spy. In the main body of the Department of Justice Inspector General's report on FISA abuse, FBI official Bill Priestap is quoted saying the FBI, quote, didn't have any indication whatsoever, unquote, of Russian influence on the Steele dossier. Our investigation uncovered redacted footnotes to that same document that completely contradicted that statement. Why would Priestap's false statement appear in the report, but the truth be hidden in classified footnotes? 14 months later, in February 2018, the FBI still briefed the Senate Intelligence Committee that the dossier had validity. When the Mueller report found no evidence of collusion, the left engineered an impeachment of President Trump. The cooperation between the House Intelligence Committee and the impeachment whistleblower remains murky. Then Chairman Adam Schiff originally denied his committee had contact with the whistleblower prior to the filing of the complaint, a claim Schiff later attempted to walk back. The genesis of the impeachment saga has yet to be fully investigated. It needs to be. Prior to the impeachment proceedings, Hunter Biden's obvious conflicts of interest in Ukraine became public, and Senator Grassley and I began investigating. We didn't target Joe and Hunter Biden Their actions demanded it. On December 9, 2019, the FBI issued a grand jury subpoena and took possession of Hunter Biden's laptop from John Paul McIsaac, a computer shop owner in Wilmington, Delaware. As the FBI left his shop with the laptop, Mr. McIsaac recalled one agent saying, quote, "It is our experience that nothing ever happens to people that don't talk about these things," unquote. That statement was the opening salvo in a coordinated effort over the next 10 months to sabotage any public revelation of Hunter Biden's laptop or any wrongdoing connected to the Bidens. Senator Grassley has provided a number of examples of that sabotage, and we will release a report that goes into far greater detail than we have time for today. When available, I hope everyone will read it. Perhaps the most egregious and effective act of sabotage against the truth was the public letter signed by 51 former intelligence officials that claimed the laptop had, quote, "all the classic earmarks of a Russian information operation," unquote. That letter itself was an information operation that interfered with and impacted the 2020 presidential election to a far greater extent than anything Russia ever could have hoped to achieve. Each of those intelligence officials needs to be interviewed to determine how that letter was masterminded. While we all condemned the violence on January 6th, we all condemned the violence on January 6th. The fervor in which the Biden Department of Justice has pursued those protesters and rioters stands in stark contrast to their lack of interest in the summer of 2020 rioters. Serious questions regarding instances of unequal application of justice and violation of January 6 defendants' due process rights remain unanswered. SWAT team arrests and treatment of prisoners are legitimate concerns. And neither the Senate nor House investigations adequately explained why the Capitol was so woefully unprepared or how many federal agents and informants were in the crowd. COVID has exposed the awesome power that can be misused by government officials. The loss of basic freedoms has been nothing less than breathtaking. Our response to the pandemic has been a miserable failure. A miserable failure. Over 1 million lives lost. The human toll of the economic devastation caused by shutdowns that did not work. And the loss of learning and other psychological harms to our children. Federal health officials denied patients early treatment and to this day refuse to acknowledge the extent of significant injuries caused by the COVID vaccines. Emails between Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins reveal how they intended to use their awesome government authority and power to accomplish a, quote, devastating published takedown, unquote, of scientists who offered a different approach to handling the pandemic. Have emails also revealed Fauci's attempt to hide his agency's role in funding dangerous research that might have led to the creation of the deadly coronavirus? We don't know because those agencies won't provide the unredacted documents. Federal health agencies have not been honest or transparent. I've written over 50 oversight letters, and the vast majority of the questions I have asked have either received an inadequate response or no response at all. I have requested information that the public has a right to know. Doctors who have had the courage and compassion to treat COVID patients using their off-label prescription rights have been vilified, censored, and their careers destroyed. Other health professionals have noticed, toed the line, and remained silent. Parents who, out of concern for their children, question school boards and administrators have been labeled potential domestic terrorists and must now fear scrutiny from the federal law enforcement. With the release of the Twitter files and the Missouri and Louisiana lawsuits against the Biden administration, we are getting a clearer picture of how active government officials were in suppressing free speech and controlling the narrative. It is also becoming obvious that the World Health Organization has been captured by the Chinese government, that global institutions in general have been captured by the left, and that some charitable foundations are exerting far more power over public policy than should be allowed. Chairman Jordan, members of the committee, you have important work before you. Although you have been generous in granting me 10 minutes to offer my testimony, I have barely scratched the surface in describing the complexity, power, and destructive nature of the forces that we face. Our founders fully understood that government was necessary to avoid anarchy, but they also knew that government power was something to fear. That's why they devised a set of checks and balances to limit government's power and influence over our lives. Ideally, a free press would hold all government officials equally accountable. But with today's media mostly biased to the left, congressional oversight is needed now more than ever. And because the administration is not cooperative and transparent, Congress needs whistleblowers from agencies throughout the federal government. I urge men and women with integrity to come forward and reveal the truth. Senator Grassley and I will do everything we can to encourage bipartisan oversight in the Senate and stand ready to assist your efforts in any way that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. We look forward to your report. We hope that is coming shortly. We now recognize Representative Raskin for his testimony.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, dear colleagues, our framers were Enlightenment thinkers who wrote us an Enlightenment Constitution. They wanted government to operate on the basis of facts, science, and common sense, not ignorance and superstition. They wanted America to usher in an age of reason. With the separation of powers, the framers constitutionalized Newton's third law of motion, checking every action with an equal and opposite reaction. And Congress in Article 1 was given the central role of legislating and making progress for our people. The oversight function is not specified in Article 1, but the Supreme Court has always said that it's implied, something necessary and proper for the legislative function. As Madison famously said, those who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power that knowledge gives. Dear colleagues, your subcommittee could conceivably become part of a proud history of serious bipartisan oversight stretching from the Teapot Dome investigation to the Boeing investigation, to the Watergate hearings, to the tobacco hearings, to the Select Committee on the January 6th attack. Or it could take oversight down a very dark alley filled with conspiracy theories and disinformation, a place where facts are the enemy and partisan destruction is the overriding goal. Millions of Americans already fear that weaponization is the right name for this special subcommittee. Not because weaponization of the government is its target, but because weaponization of the government is its purpose. What's in a name? Well, everything is here. The odd name of the weaponization subcommittee constitutes a case of pure psychological projection. When former President Donald Trump and his followers accuse you of doing something, they're usually telling you exactly what their own plans are. By establishing a select subcommittee on weaponization, they're telling us that Donald Trump's followers, who obviously control the subcommittee, will continue weaponizing any part of the government they can get their hands on to attack their enemies, defined as anyone who stands in the way of their quest for power. To be clear, that's not an exclusively partisan operation. They've proven that they will weaponize the government not just against the other party, but against anyone who refuses to bend to the will and whim of one Donald Trump, whether that's a lifelong Republican state election official like Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a foreign head of state like President Zelensky, a political movement like Black Lives Matter, a once close personal friend and ally of Trump's like his personal lawyer Michael Cohen for many years, or even a sycophantic Trump cabinet appointee and lifelong Republican like Attorney General William Barr, if these people break from the habits of lying and lawlessness that define life as a camp follower in the cult of Donald Trump. But if the weaponized MAGA campaign isn't exactly partisan, it is entirely political because it's got an overriding electoral focus, and you know what it is. It's all about restoring Donald Trump, the twice impeached former president, to the office he lost by 7 million votes in 2020 and tried to steal back in a political coup and violent insurrection against our constitutional order on January 6, 2021. You disagree? Well, please don't take my word for it. As our chairman might say, just listen to what Chairman Jordan himself had to say 6 months ago at the Conservative Political Action Conference in Dallas, where he was predicting GOP victory in the 22 elections and promising that oversight of Hunter Biden's laptop and the claim that the federal government is treating moms and dads, like the ones in this room, like terrorists, would be the centerpiece of the GOP's work in the House when they got it back into power. Relaxing with a friendly interviewer, Chairman Jordan gave the game away entirely. Quote, "All those things need to be investigated just so you have the truth," he said. Plus, that will help frame up the 2024 race when I hope and I think President Trump is going to run, and we need to make sure that he wins. We need to make sure that he wins. This call to arms for the 2024 presidential election was met with wild applause from the CPAC audience. I urge every member of this subcommittee to go and watch the interview. Now, of course, a serious bipartisan committee focused on weaponization of the government would zero in quickly on the Trump administration itself, which brought weaponization to frightening new levels across the board. Consider just a few examples I have time for, illustrative of dozens I can provide the subcommittee. One, in a 6-week period in 2020, Donald Trump fired or removed 5 different departmental inspectors general simply for doing their jobs and not caving into Trump's coercive political demands to cover up different forms of administration wrongdoing and misconduct. April 3rd, 2020, Trump informed Congress he was firing Intelligence Community Inspector General Michael Atkinson, who had received a whistleblower complaint in August 2019 about improper demands made by Trump to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. In May 2020, Trump fired Steve Linick, IG of the State Department, later claiming he had no idea who he was and saying that he fired him only at Secretary Pompeo's request. That inspector general was investigating Pompeo's decision to bypass Congress in sending billions of dollars in arms to Saudi Arabia. I don't have time to get into the details of the others, but May 20, he fired Mitch Bem, the transportation deputy IG. He relieved of duty Glenn Fine, acting IG for the Defense Department. He removed Christy Grimm, the acting inspector general of HHS. Second, breaching the traditional separation between the president and Department of Justice criminal prosecutions, Trump and his obliging sycophantic attorney generals, like Jeff Sessions and William Barr, repeatedly pressured career prosecutors to go hard or go soft in particular cases, always seeking to reward Trump's friends or to punish his enemies. If weaponization of the Department of Justice has any meaning, this is it. Consider the egregious case of Gregory Craig, a White House counsel under Obama, who was targeted by the DOJ for alleged FARA violations and finally indicted on a single count of making false statements. He was acquitted unanimously by the jury in less than 5 hours, and one of his lawyers observed that the Department of Justice had hounded his client without any evidence and without any purpose. Former U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman said that Greg Craig never should have been prosecuted. Consider the case of Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer and confidant for many years. In August 2018, he pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations over large hush money payments he arranged before the 2016 election to keep porn star Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal from talking about sexual affairs they had with Donald Trump. You guys remember this one? Well, after Barr became Attorney General in February of 2019, he worked to kill further investigations related to those payoffs and suggested that Mr. Cohen's conviction on campaign finance charges itself be reversed, even though 6 months had already passed since Cohen had entered a guilty plea. Amazingly, after Cohen was imprisoned for a year and then being transferred out of prison to home confinement during COVID-19, Barr and the DOJ intervened to block his transfer because Cohen would not immediately accept as a condition of his ankle bracelet home confinement not to engage in First Amendment activities, specifically writing and publishing a book about Donald Trump or saying anything in public on TV or in the social media about Donald Trump. Cohen had already been home for 2 weeks when this unconstitutional demand from DOJ appeared, and when he and his attorney dared to ask questions about it, 3 federal marshals showed up with handcuffs and shackles, and he was returned to the Otisville Correctional Institute. There he spent 16 days in solitary confinement before they were able to get his case before a federal district judge, who immediately found that Barr's purpose, quote, in transferring Cohen from release on furlough and home confinement back to custody was retaliatory in response to Cohen desiring to exercise his First Amendment rights to publish a book critical of the president and to discuss the book on social media. Can you think of a more egregious example of weaponizing the Department of Justice for nakedly political purposes than imprisoning and putting in solitary confinement the president's own former lawyer simply because he wanted to exercise his First Amendment rights? Consider the John Durham investigation. At the urging of Republicans, including the good chairman, the John Durham Special Counsel investigation was set up in 2019 by Barr to try to find wrongdoing by intelligence or law enforcement agencies in the origins of the Mueller investigation. And we've heard some of the murmurings about this today. After 4 years and millions of dollars spent, the Durham investigation closed as a total flop without unearthing anything like the deep state conspiracy that Republicans have been denouncing around here for years. It couldn't find anything of substance to it. Yet Barr and Durham kept pressing in clearly abusive ways. I hope your subcommittee will investigate. One former DOJ prosecutor, Robert Luskin, a defense lawyer who represented 2 witnesses before the Durham probe, told the New York Times he was shocked. This stuff had my head spinning, he said. When did these guys drink the Kool-Aid, and who served it to them? Amazingly, when prosecutors participating in this wild goose chase actually came into possession of evidence of a real offense from Italian government officials of a potentially major financial crime committed by Donald Trump, Durham was suddenly deputized to investigate it, and the whole investigation mysteriously disappeared without a trace. Trump's enablers now want this subcommittee not to examine the Durham debacle as a case study in dangerous weaponization of the justice function, but rather to pick up the baton from the defeated and demoralized Durham team and to keep the wild goose chase going today. Third, the former president had no qualms about literally weaponizing our nation's law enforcement and military against First Amendment activity for his political purposes. I commend to you the debacle that took place on June 1st, 2020 in Lafayette Square, where they mobilized an interagency law enforcement troop and then unleashed them on horseback with pepper spray and batons, billy clubs, rubber bullets against a totally lawfully present crowd. Mr. Chairman, I want to be clear. I'm not suggesting that any of the investigations that have taken place during the last 2 years have been perfect. I'm sure they could have been improved in some ways. That's a legit thing for you to ask. But it's one thing to engage in systematic oversight driven by a commitment to facts and the truth, and something radically different to set up a platform for a series of hit-and-run partisan attacks that are just vindictive, vendetta-driven, and meant to frame up a presidential campaign in 2024. And some of the new rhetoric we've been hearing can be dangerous, as the ranking member was pointing out. After the execution of a perfectly lawful judicial search warrant in Palm Beach in August of last year, politicians and media figures began denouncing the FBI, the whole FBI and FBI agents in vitriolic terms. And since then, the FBI and DHS have observed an increase in violent threats posted on social media against federal officials and facilities, including a threat to place a dirty bomb in front of FBI headquarters and issuing general calls for civil war and armed rebellion. And we've heard those calls before in this chamber. On August 11th, last year, a person wearing a technical vest and armed with an AR-style rifle and nail gun attempted to forcibly enter the FBI Cincinnati field office. When officers responded, he fled the scene and a pursuit followed. During a prolonged standoff with the FBI, the man fired multiple shots at Ohio State Highway Patrol. Mr. Chairman, the public is skeptical about this strange new venture with the strange new name that's being launched because so many of the members involved have done.
Hey, could you guys do me a huge favor? We have 220 people watching and 68 likes. Do you guys think you could help me out, help more people come join us, and hit that like button, please, and thank you?
Everything they can to block the January 6th committee's investigation of the worst insurrectionary domestic violent attack on an American election in the American Congress in our history. And the public wonders whether members who refuse to comply with congressional subpoenas themselves should be issuing congressional subpoenas to other people. Oversight must be organized around a comprehensive search for the truth that will lead to progress, and not around revenge, which will lead us as a country to chaos and ruin. I hope the subcommittee will find a way to embark upon a truly bipartisan agenda with all members participating and agreeing on a common agenda, and I wish you well and Godspeed on behalf of this difficult venture that you are about to proceed on.
Wallace.
I thank the gentleman. I can assure the gentleman from Maryland that we respect the FBI agents, particularly the ones who have come to us, the dozens who have come to us, and we will focus on the facts, something I felt was not exactly presented in the proper way in your testimony. I understand that the senator from Wisconsin has a number of documents he'd like to ask to be entered in the record, so without objection, those will be entered, and we'll get those from you, Senator Johnson. We now turn to our former colleague, the former Democrat member from the great state of Hawaii, Congressman Gabb.
Thank you very much, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members, aloha. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to speak with you today. Benjamin Franklin said, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech." I love our country and I cherish our God-given freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution. Like every one of you, I took an oath, both as a soldier and as a member of Congress, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, I've had the privilege of serving alongside many of you in Congress for 8 years, representing the people of Hawaii's 2nd Congressional District, serving on the Armed Services and Foreign Affairs Committees. I'm honored to be able to continue to serve as a Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves now for almost 20 years, where during that time I deployed to 3 war zones and participated in multiple overseas training exercises, where I had the opportunity to see firsthand what life is like in countries where there is no First Amendment, where there is no free press, where government deems itself to be the moral arbiter to its people, dictating to them what is right and wrong, what can and cannot be said, who can speak, who cannot, who is free to worship, and who is not. Now, our founders understood the importance of enshrining our God-given freedoms in the Constitution and Bill of Rights to ensure that no matter which party or person may be in power at any given time, our founding documents serve as a reminder of these freedoms that are guaranteed to every American. Thomas Paine said, "He that would make his own liberty secure must guard even his enemy from opposition. For if he violates this duty, he establishes a precedent that will reach to himself." We cannot be so short-sighted as to thinking silencing speech that we don't like today will not result in our own voices being silenced tomorrow. The work that you've all been charged with in this committee affects all Americans, and it is too important to allow it to fall victim to partisan politics. No matter how deep your differences, we must all agree to stand on the side of liberty. Unfortunately, right now we live in a country where many Americans are afraid to speak freely, afraid to express themselves, afraid to actually have real open dialogue and debate, afraid of losing their job, being canceled, or being accused of a crime. which could happen if recently introduced legislation criminalizing so-called hate speech is passed into law, speech that, no matter how abhorrent, is still protected under the First Amendment. Now, this fear and this culture of fear and self-censorship is not unfounded. We have individuals in our government often working through their arms in the mainstream media and big tech, doing exactly what our founders rejected, trying to control what we, the people, are allowed to see and say under the guise of protecting us from so-called misinformation or disinformation. Now, of course, they appoint themselves as the sole authority and voice of truth, of information, backed by the most lethal force on earth with the power to target anyone they deem a threat. They alone.
Yo, shout out to Tori. My son Hunter is the smartest man I know. Come on, man. Thank you, Tori.
Are the ones, self-designated, who get to decide what is true and what is false, what is information and what is misinformation or disinformation. They say they're doing this for us, that they're doing this for our own good, to protect the people. But in reality, the truth is they think that we're too stupid to think for ourselves, too stupid to discern for ourselves and to draw our own conclusions. Now, the idea that we must just blindly accept whatever the government or those in power tell us is true goes against the very essence of our Constitution and Bill of Rights, which were created as a resounding rejection of the reign of kings, churches, and authorities. They tell us we must blindly trust them or face the consequences, even though our government has a long history of lying to us, the American people. Just to cite a few examples, we were lied to about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which spurred the war that I and so many others served in and so many others sacrificed their lives in. They lied for almost 2 decades, claiming success in Afghanistan, when in fact we saw failure after failure after failure, coming at a great cost to this country. We saw lies about Vietnam that were revealed in the release of the Pentagon Papers. We saw lies about our own government illegally surveilling Americans. These are just a few examples. There are many more. Ranking Member Plaskett talked in her opening comments about how individuals in the FBI also throughout our country's history have abused their power, weaponizing those agencies to advance their own political interests. This is not and cannot be reduced to a partisan fight. The stakes are too high. We all must recognize our own responsibility to stand against such abuses. But as we sit here today, the danger is that if we choose to reject or challenge whatever those in power declare is the so-called truth, we are accused of being anti-authority. We are accused of being a danger to society, accused of spreading misinformation, and are then targeted, smeared, and called things like Russian asset, white supremacist, bigot, racist, sexist, extremist, traitor, and so on. More dangerous than any baseless smear, our own government institutions, which exist to serve the people, they are being weaponized against us. The Department of Homeland Security declared a heightened domestic terrorism threat due to 3 factors, the first of which is, quote, the proliferation of false or misleading narratives which sow discord or undermine public trust in U.S. government institutions, end of quote. They are the ones who get to decide what those false or misleading narratives are. Former CIA Director John Brennan said in 2021 that, quote, members of the Biden team are now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas. An unholy alliance frequently of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, and even libertarians. End of quote. Attorney General Garland charged his newly created domestic terrorism unit with targeting those who hold, quote, anti-authority views. That included parents who dared to protest at Board of Education meetings, concerned and standing up for the right for themselves to have a say in their children's education. A draft copy of the Department of Homeland Security Quadrennial Homeland Security Review outlined their intent to target quote unquote inaccurate information on a whole host of topics, to include the origins of COVID, vaccines, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and U.S. support to Ukraine. Their misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation team exists to, quote, counter all types of disinformation. Once again, they get to determine what this disinformation is. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg revealed on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast recently that Facebook limited the exposure of the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story just weeks ahead of the 2020 election, only after talking with the FBI. Twitter took similar action, but they recently apologized for doing so, recognizing that their decision was wrong. The cozy relationship between the White House officials, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and big tech is now well documented and results in private companies not restricted by the First Amendment doing the dirty censorship work of those in government who are not legally allowed to do so themselves. The threat big tech monopolies pose to our democracy is real and serious. I've had personal experience with this. After the first Democratic primary presidential debate in 2019, I was the most searched candidate of the night. Unfortunately, and suddenly, my Google Ads account was mysteriously suspended without any notice or explanation. There were no responses to our multiple attempts to resolve whatever problem could have caused this, but after some time passed, magically my account was reinstated, again with no explanation or apology. But their actions limited my ability to connect with voters who were actively seeking more information about my candidacy and why I was offering to serve them as President and Commander-in-Chief. This has not only happened to me, it's happened to other candidates running for various offices. Joe Kent, running for Congress in Washington State, is one I know personally of. This happens all the time, with these big tech monopolies interfering in our democracy by manipulating search results based on whatever it is that they want the American people to know about a particular candidate or issue that should be concerning to any one of us and all of us. Now, recently, we've learned that with the release of the Twitter files detailed by Matt Taibbi and others, high-level former FBI and CIA and other government officials were behind Hamilton 68 and their list of 644 social media accounts supposedly linked to, quote, Russian influence activities online. Now, Hamilton 68's work was widely cited as fact by institutions like Harvard and Stanford, by mainstream news organizations across the board, by members of the House of Representatives and Senate from both political parties, including the head of the Intelligence Committee. The problem is, it was false. Twitter themselves determined that the vast majority of counts that Hamilton 68 targeted on this list of 644 were, quote, neither strongly Russian nor strongly bots, end of quote. They were mostly anti-establishment American voices from across the political spectrum. I was one of them. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton accused me, a sitting member of Congress, a soldier, and a candidate running for president, of being, quote, groomed by the Russians. Her baseless smear worked as intended. It was something that was repeated over and over, headline after headline, article after article, pushed online in every way. This had the harmful impact that was intended. I could give you many examples of interactions that I've had with people throughout that campaign and still today. But I remember one in particular that had an impact. Just weeks after this statement was made, I was in South Carolina at a campaign event when an elderly woman came up to me, and I could tell that she was very disturbed. She came up and she put her hands on my shoulders and she looked into my eyes, her eyes welling up, hands shaking, and she said, "Look me in the eyes. I need to know if you are working for Putin." She was serious. I couldn't believe it. I looked her straight back in the eyes and expressed to her from my heart how much I love this country, so much that I'm willing to die for it. More recently, U.S. Senator Mitt Romney accused me of treason, a crime that is punishable by death under our laws. I challenged him to back this serious allegation up with evidence. What was this based on? There was no response, no explanation, no evidence, and certainly no apology. Now, these accusations are often shrugged off as, well, hey, it's politics. People say things about each other all the time. That may be easy for some of you to say, but for somebody who wears the uniform, this is serious. And it's serious not only to me, but to my fellow service members and veterans, every one of us making a decision at some point in our lives to raise our right hand, prepared and volunteering to lay our life down for this country. What does that mean in reality? It means that before every deployment, in our own hearts, we have to make peace with the possibility that we may not come home. It means writing letters to our loved ones, trying to find the words to express our love and gratitude, knowing that that may be our final goodbye. It means for those of us who do come home, doing our best every single day to honor the great sacrifices of our brothers and sisters who paid that ultimate price. This is much bigger than me or any one individual. When those who dare to challenge the establishment are targeted by this powerful conglomerate of government, corporate media, and big tech, weaponizing all that they have against the people for their own selfish gain, it has a dangerous chilling effect on free speech, and it sends a very powerful message. If you dare to challenge us, we will come after you. The more we allow this to happen, we start looking less and less like a democratic republic and more like a banana republic. Instead of a government ordained to secure these rights, we are now increasingly facing a government determined to take those rights away. George Washington warned, "For if men are to be precluded from offering their sentiments on a matter which may involve the most serious and alarming consequences that can invite the consideration of mankind, reason is of no use to us. The freedom of speech may be taken away, and dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to slaughter." We have to stop this insanity and protect these sacred freedoms. Vanquish the fear and self-censorship that is now pervasive. Every one of us taking action to breathe new life into the open marketplace of ideas that is at the heart of a thriving democracy, encouraging vigorous and substantive debate, encouraging people to think for themselves so we can draw our own conclusions, where we can disagree without devolving into hate, where we can respect each other as fellow Americans and treat each other with aloha. The work you have before you is critical for all of these reasons. The stakes are high. The consequences, for better or worse, will be long-lasting. And for the sake of the American people, our freedom, and the future of this country we love, I pray we can set aside our partisan differences and commit to standing together to defend the constitutional right of every American to live free. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Congresswoman Gabbard. We appreciate those fine remarks. Congressman Raskin, we thank you for being here. Senator Johnson, we thank you as well for your testimony. The committee will stand in recess for 5 minutes more or less to get ready for the second panel.
What's up, Kyle? You want to come and jump on here for 5 minutes while we got this break? Feel free. I'd love to hear what you got to say, man. I think everybody would. Drop a 1 in the comments if you guys want to see Kyle come on the show for a second and say what is up. This is crazy. I don't understand how Tulsi has like more knowledge than somebody like Kyle or the whistleblowers or the FBI agents that have came out. So Kyle says my friend was scheduled to speak today. He was bumped for Tulsi, some senator, and a woman who is a former FBI agent and not a whistleblower. That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. She's so fake. Oh man, now I really want to hear what Kyle has to say. I wish he didn't have to go on another show so quick. I don't think he's gonna have time to jump on here, but he can if he wants. Yeah, Kyle. Okay, yeah. Let me just send you a link, Kyle. Hell yeah. All right, there comes all the ones in the comments. All right, give me 1 second. Let me try to get Kyle in here really quick. Shouldn't be too hard. I should just be able to send you a link over on Twitter, Kyle. I'll send it to your Twitter DMs. You guys got to make sure you guys swing over there and follow Kyle and show him some love. Kyle's doing really good on Rumble. He's crushing it over on Rumble. And this is when I talk about Kyle, I don't know how to explain it. When you meet somebody that I don't have more respect for anybody than Kyle. That out of everybody that I've interviewed, this man right here, I'm at a loss for words. He's such a great guy. Our country is lucky to have him in the FBI. Very lucky. He's not somebody that I enjoy talking to. He's somebody that I look up to, and I respect that much. That when I go to like fly off the handle or I get upset, I just think to myself, like, the amount that I've learned just from having a few conversations with Kyle, for a few hours here and there. He's really somebody to aspire to be like, in my opinion. Role model for everybody. Common sense is not so common anymore. It isn't. Got to get Trump back in there. In my opinion, I think Trump's the only one that could, and not just you in the room. Oh, I see you, Kyle. Cool. All right. Hey, what's up, Kyle? Can you hear me? What's up, buddy? Can you hear me? I can hear you. I can't hear you. Let me see if I add you to my scene, if I can get you in here. All right, what up, Kyle? All right, I don't think I can't hear you for some reason. I don't know if it's on my end. Nope, I don't hear you. Is there, I don't see the lights on the back of your mic. Might be something in my program. He's gonna come right back. No, I can't. Damn, that sucks. It must be something on my end for some reason. I don't know. I just had my buddy change some audio stuff on my stream, and now I can't hear you. So it's probably on my end. Damn it, that sucks, Kyle. Sorry guys, I really wanted to bring Kyle on. I don't know why I can't hear him. Sucks. I don't know why I can't get him in here. I can see your audio's on my end. I'm just not hearing it for some reason. Check my audio mixer really quick. All right, Kyle, say something. Yeah, I'm not even getting anything on here. All right, Kyle. Sorry, my man. Let me get you on the phone here.
I got you here.
Yeah, what's up, Kyle? Now I can hear you.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, that'll work. So what are you thinking about Tulsi? Why didn't they invite you, or they bumped your buddy to put Tulsi on there?
Yeah, so my buddy is the whistleblower who actually went and pulled all of the cases that the FBI had tagged with the EDU officials threat tag, showing which parents were being they were being investigated in school board meetings. He was scheduled to go today. They bumped him for a woman who showed up on Fox News, who resigned as an FBI agent and is not a whistleblower. Okay. She's just a lady who resigned. And I'm pretty confident that she resigned because her friend was killed, which is a good enough reason. But she didn't want to be an FBI agent anymore. And then she wrote a letter saying that it was too politicized, but no whistleblower activity, which is a specific category of people who go to Congress with violations of rule, law, or policy, or gross waste of fraud, race, and abuse, like that are using government resources inappropriately. So you can go and bring those allegations. That's what makes you a whistleblower. She didn't do those things. She just said she was sad and she didn't like.
What?
But here's the thing: they put two pretty ladies on, who've both been on Fox News. One, on 3 or 4 shows. Tulsi, obviously, a lot more extensively. They both do a pretty good job of being presentable on camera, and it's my belief they're basically just casting off what shows good on TV.
That's so sad. This would have been a perfect opportunity to hear from FBI whistleblowers' firsthand account of exactly what's going on inside the FBI.
So they put a closed hearing that happened on Tuesday, and if people watched a little bit of Hannity last night, or if they watched John Solomon's show, my friend George, who was on my podcast, people can go listen to what he has to say. He's a very sober voice. He's incredibly measured and very experienced. He was an NSA analyst. He was a senior intelligence analyst at the FBI, 12 plus years, and actually retired from government service. But he also worked in the military as a intel analyst under the Marine Corps and the United States Navy for like 26 years combined. He is not being questioned in a public forum. So these are theater. This is what it means to me.
Kyle, thank you so much for the insight, because to the average person, I thought this would have been a huge win, but now once you actually hear from somebody like yourself on the inside that has this knowledge, you really start to think that this is just for show.
I mean, who's Tulsi Gabbard? What does she have to say about the weaponization of the FBI? They opened the hearing up by reading all of our whistleblower allegations, of which I either know almost everybody that's made those allegations, or I'm the person who made the allegations. So who are they? Why are they interviewing this lady who looks pretty? She's wearing a white suit. She ran for Congress, and then she joined the military right afterwards. So to claim that she is some sort of, military hero, or that people in the military think of her in some sort of fraternal way, like she's an officer, number one, and number two, she's a guardsman. She's not what I signed up when I was an enlisted guy at 27 years old.
I don't know how to think about this.
It's theater. That's why you have 5 minutes for each side. You're going to go and do presentations. Here's the way that real serious interrogations and interviews go. We sit down, we have no time limit, and I ask you all the questions that I want to know the answers to, and I try to do it in a nice way, and we're collegiate, and we're friendly, and then occasionally we have to hammer you with harder questions. That's how you get to the bottom of it. If they were serious about doing real interrogations of what has been going wrong, they would be bringing former prosecutors and people like me who know how to ask questions and do real interviews that can bring out, the actual criminal activity of this federal agency. And that's what they would try to expose it with. But they're not doing that. It's 5-minute people where they're doing talking points. They're trying to hit their sound bites that hit MSNBC and CNN and Fox News and, Newsmax or whatever. And that's it. And that's what we're going to see.
Man, Kyle.
I have almost no hope in this thing.
Kyle, would you be interested in coming back on the show if we could get this audio set back up
for sure,
next week and chat about it?
Yeah, we'll get it done. I just did a compilation because I'm probably going to be on Tucker tonight, and this is over a piece that I just wrote over the last couple of days. But here's what's crazy. I've found 7 news articles that have covered independent whistleblower disclosures that I have personally done in the last 6 months, 8 months, something like that. So maybe it's 12 months. It doesn't make a difference. It's like 7 news articles that are independent pushes that we've made to Congress. So who is moving the needle more than people that are associated with me and my friends that are trying to get the truth out to people? We're not asking any money for it. They actually made my buddy Garrett, who was scheduled to testify today, they made him pay his own way to D.C. He hasn't been paid since August last year. I sent him $2,000 so that he's not broke, so he can fly and not have to worry about feeding his freaking kids, because he's got 4 children, one of whom is an infant.
You guys hear what Kyle just
This
said?
is not a serious group of people.
When you told me that this
My
morning,
buddy George, who testified, dude, he had to drive down and he paid his own way. He paid for his own hotel, the whole thing. People who are whistleblowers, who are not being paid, are literally driving down or flying in on their own dime to testify for the American people, and they're getting bumped for Tulsi Gabbard, who I'm sure had somebody come, cover her flight.
so bizarre, Kyle. That
So put your hope into that. I'm just saying.
man, thank you so much, Kyle. As soon as you get time, let me know and we'll schedule something and put it on.
Yeah, I'm just had a flood of things in my piece. One of the producers from Jesse Waters asked me to be on tomorrow, and Tucker for today, and this is all about stuff that's going on when it comes to the FBI going after radical traditional Catholics, which they're apparently going to pull the intel product that I exposed. But that's what they do. They do something that's illegal, immoral, or unethical. Somebody blows the whistle on it and exposes it. And then once they have to answer for it, then they just pull it off the servers. The same thing happened, if people are familiar with the Militia Violent Extremists document. So Ted Cruz was out in front of Chris Wray. He pulled his boot off and he said, I want to self-report because I've got the Gonzalez flag on the back of my cowboy boot.
Yep.
And then 3 days later, my buddy went and checked, and they'd scrubbed the document. It had been there before, and they scrubbed it.
Say that one more time.
Because it's a violation of First Amendment principles. Yeah. When the FBI violates people's First Amendment principles, or appears to have done so because of the things that they're putting out in the intelligence sphere, then they're more than happy to just wipe it off the server and act like it was never there. And they'd be like, well, it was just an intelligence product. It wasn't an operational piece. But if it doesn't get called out, then it turns into investigations into people. Right. And what's funny is that we know for a fact, because my buddy did the background research, my buddy who got bumped from testifying, Mike Glover, some of your people watching your stream will know, Mike Glover is a retired Green Beret. He was a sergeant major in the United States Army in the Special Forces. He's a freaking hero. He's a stud. He worked for the CIA as a contractor and did defensive work for them, which is with a GRS. And then he founded a company called Fieldcraft Survival and another one that's called American Contingency. Okay. And they listed American Contingency on this document that I exposed, which is one of the major reasons why I went forward with it. They listed him as an online militia group with a quote-unquote low history of violence. He has no history of violence in the United States, and neither does his unit, but the company that he founded called American Contingency. But what they say is low probably equals 0 to 5 instances of violence. So the intel analyst just goes, okay, well, it's a low history of violence. Okay, that's intel speak, but it's very damning for a person who's trying to run a business and trying to make a living in a post-military environment. And like I said, this guy retired honorably, and I'm sure he's a disabled vet, and he's a freaking stud. He goes out there and trains people in the FBI. And they wrote this document about him. And then they actually set it up to their e-Guardian system, and they put a counterterrorism case into him. Now, it was an assessment that ended up getting dismissed by an agent who did his job, but some weenie in the intel world wrote this thing up, made the allegation that he was a possible threat, and so then he shows up in the FBI's database, and he'll never get out of that, ever. I'm sure I'm in it too, but I don't care.
How do you guys know if you guys are in that database or not? Do you have to have inside access?
You don't.
You don't.
Yeah, you have to know an FBI agent that'll look for it.
Wow. So, and then is that similar to what happened with Laura Loomer when she got flagged for that gun thing and she didn't even know about it?
Unclear, but as I told you, I connected with Laura. I've connected her with some people in Florida. We're going to work through and we're going to get that squared away on the low level, because it's not a high level thing. Her story sounds like she may have upset somebody, but it also could have been an administrative problem. We'll find out. I'm going to make sure that she has her gun rights fixed, because I know enough people at CGIS and we know enough people in the ATF that are good people that actually care about Americans' rights. And she's obviously not a felon. So There's no excuse for that to be the case.
And is that happening to other people besides Laura? Like, could there be an FBI file on me that I don't know about?
Yeah, why not? There's FBI files on tons of people. It doesn't necessarily mean it's derogatory, but if you're the subject of an investigation, and there's plenty of people that are, then that will show up when someone does a name check. Let's say you wanted to go visit the White House. So they're going to name check you, or, if you were going to go sit down with the president, not just visit the White House, but if you're going to sit down with the president, they would name check you, and the security Secret Service guys would see whether or not you have a FBI file on you or a case and what it says, and the FBI would basically respond to the name check with, some significant, no significant, or no derogatory information on the individual.
Wow. What time are you supposed to be going on those shows tonight? I would love to catch them if you're going to be, if you know the time.
Yeah, Tucker is live, so I'm not 100% sure, but it's, it's wherever it's on in your world. I think it's 8 o'clock here. They're going to tape live, so I've got to figure out if I'm going to drive down to Phoenix or not, but I'm going to be on a Spaces in about 25 minutes just ranting about this organization that is really abusing Americans' rights. And it's not a left or a right partisan issue. It's not a conservative versus progressive thing. It's you don't want a weaponized FBI that's being used to push a political agenda because it's too dangerous for everybody. Mm-hmm. It's a secret police. And the thing people don't understand is that the FBI at this point, and this is why Tulsi Gabbard doesn't know what she's talking about, it is an intelligence agency with a law enforcement capability. There is nothing scarier than that.
Explain why, in case anybody doesn't understand that.
Because intelligence agencies function on an information basis. That's where their power comes from, and that's what they do. That's their currency. And an intelligence investigation is a circle. It never ends. Once you start it, it rolls, and it just keeps going and going and going around. It is a cyclic process that feeds information in and analyzes information out. So it just looks for more information. That's all it does. It doesn't ever have to end. Whereas a criminal case is linear. And you can spin a criminal case off anywhere in an intelligence investigation once you've been looking at somebody. If anybody looks at anybody long enough, they're going to find a federal crime. It's not very hard. It's a question of whether or not they want to prosecute. And as the agents that I've worked with who have 25 plus years of experience have told me, the FBI was very famous for, seeing a crime and finding who done it. That's what they did. That's the history of the Bureau for most of it, probably 95% of what the FBI did. But now what it does is it just identifies subjects that are problems, and then it finds a crime, which should scare the crap out of people.
Terrifying. Kyle, when you find out when you're going to go on for sure, let me know. Shoot me a link, and I might throw up a stream and promote it, man. So thanks for stopping by, buddy. I appreciate you.
It's my pleasure.
And let everybody know where they can find you at.
And talk.
Let everybody know where they can find you at.
Yeah, they can just find me on Twitter or True Social. It's at Kyle Seraphin, as people saw in the chat. And then they can also find me on Rumble, which is Kyle Seraphin, rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin.
Perfect, man. Appreciate you, buddy.
Yeah, man. You guys have fun watching.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it, man. Kyle's awesome, guys. I can't speak any highlier of him, that's for sure.
The FBI and the DOJ enacted a series of Attorney General guidelines for conducting investigations. The Congress gave us the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. Now, however, the use of FISA against U.S. citizens, as seen in the Carter Page case, has presented a threat to American civil liberties. FISA suspends the Constitution. For its first decades, the Foreign Intelligence Act was used, as its name implies, to surveil foreign agents resident in this country. FISA needs to be returned to that original purpose. That is something that the Congress can fix. That the FBI collided with Twitter to suppress free speech is shocking. What is even more surprising is the FBI's explanation or denial that they did that. Over the past few years, when shenanigans were discovered in the Bureau, by the Bureau, the miscreants were shown the door. Director Wray and other FBI leaders, their theme is, the bad apples are no longer with us. With the Twitter revelations, there is not even that usual half apology, but a bold-faced denial that nothing is wrong. The First Amendment guarantees free speech. The FBI, by urging Twitter to censor speech, which it could not itself do, was engaging in a perversion of the First Amendment. For most of FBI history, agents were trained that part of the FBI's mission was to be a guarantor of the Bill of Rights. That has now been turned on its head. A renewed emphasis on the Constitution as a cornerstone of the Bureau's work is what is called for. When I was in training as a new agent, we were each given a pocket copy of the Constitution. We were told to keep it in our breast pocket, and that if we did that, when you would think about it when interviewing a citizen or when searching someone's home, if you kept it close to your heart, you wouldn't go wrong. For years, when explaining the FBI to various groups, I would always emphasize that unlike other countries, the United States was blessed to have as its domestic security service a law enforcement agency, an agency rooted in the rule of law. The United States now may be cursed to have a domestic intelligence agency with police powers. We may never get the Bureau back to the culture of a tell-the-truth law enforcement agency that I lived and loved in the pre-9/11 era, but the effort of reform is worth it, noble, and direly needed. I thank you all for your efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Appreciate your testimony. Professor Turley, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the subcommittee. It's an honor to appear before you to discuss this subject. It is my sincere hope that there is room for bipartisan agreement, even in these times, when we talk about the government's role in regulating speech. We all are here today because we all have a deep love for this country. We come from different backgrounds, different parts, but we share that common article of faith. I'd like to speak to that today. These are difficult questions that I'm going to address, and these are divisive times, but they transcend politics. Notably, in yesterday's hearing in the Oversight Committee, James Baker said that he also thought there might be need for legislation. This is the former Twitter executive, former FBI general counsel, and he said there might be need for legislation to limit the role of the FBI and other agencies in their relationship with social media companies. I think that that is true. But one of the reasons that this committee has a difficult task before it is that there is a crisis of faith, and it's not just simply with some of our constitutional values. Polls are showing that people have a distrust for the federal government, but also with the FBI. 20% in a recent poll said that the FBI was the greatest threat to the country. Only 40% of Americans said that they trust the FBI most of the time. 53% said they felt the FBI was acting politically. I'm not saying that those results are warranted. What I'm saying is it's a serious problem when the public, large portions of the public, have that level of distrust. My testimony that I've submitted to the record goes through the constitutional and case law that applies to this issue of when the government goes too far. And I say that these are really very heavily contested questions. There are cases on both sides. And in some of my discussions, I say that actually I think the social media companies have a better argument. And in some parts, I think that there are legitimate issues here that might trigger the First Amendment. There are two different aspects to that analysis. One is that we do have direct action shown in the Twitter files by government employees. So we don't have to get into what I spend most of my time on, which is agency theory under the First Amendment. We know that there were dozens of federal employees who tagged or targeted particular posts and posters for possible elimination and suspension. Now, we can question whether that was a directive or a partnership or a coordination, but there was direct government conduct. So the question for this committee, first and foremost, is do you want your government in that business? And we can have, I hope, a civil and respectful conversation about that. What's interesting about the Twitter files is that they establish what could be viewed as an agency. Now, as I go through a lot of the cases in the past, courts have really struggled with this. At what point does a private party become an agent of the government? Cases like Page and others say that you can have that. Even if, by the way, the private agent turns down some requests, you can have that. And I go through the various tests that apply. I also go through three things that are established. One, this may be the largest censorship system in the history of our country. Twitter alone reaches 450 million people. They're 15th on social media. Companies like Facebook dwarf them in terms of their size. It is a censorship system. The ACLU has made clear that censorship can be both in government or private form, and it certainly can be in a government and private type of coordination. Second, This is beyond what agencies usually do. This was not the FBI responding to criticism of the FBI. It was generally policing this thing called disinformation. And eventually they tagged things like jokes. They tagged just a ridiculous scope of information that they believed could be removed. And then third, what we have here on these, in terms of what the government's doing, is what we've seen before. Even if you assume that this does not create an agency relationship, it's wrong. It's wrong for the government to be in the business of silencing citizens. It's wrong. We saw it during the McCarthy period, where the government was behind the blacklisting of individuals. We said it was wrong. It was wrong then. It's wrong now. We have to have that debate. And it has to move somewhere beyond our normal partisan divisions. Adlai Stevenson said that when there's a loss of faith in government, we lose everything. I hope that Senator Stevenson's words resonate with members of this committee. We have everything at stake when you have the government involved in censorship. And so I thank you again for allowing me to appear, and I look forward to working with members on both sides to look at this issue. Thank you.
Professor, thank you. Thank you for stating the gravity of the situation and the question before us. Mr. Williams, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for inviting me to testify today. My name is Elliot Williams, and over the course of 15 years, I had the honor of serving in all three branches of our government. Across that time, I worked as both a career prosecutor and a senior appointee, as both a rank-and-file employee and in senior management, and in both Republican and Democratic administrations. For a major portion of my time in government, I served in roles tied directly to the relationship between the executive and legislative branches of government. I served as counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee across the building, or across the courtyard, and helped run legislative affairs at both the United States Department of Justice and the United States Customs and Immigration Enforcement, or ICE. And I know that I'm here today speaking in my personal capacity and not on behalf of any employer. Now, having sat in the seats of the very staff behind you alongside some of the very people who are still here today, as well as in the role of the executive branch employee or official responding to your requests, I can say that each institution's interests are critically important to creating a healthy, functioning democracy. When they collide, it is crucial to recognize that our institutions are best served by reaching compromises or accommodations, and we're going to hear that word again in a moment, that protect the core interests of each branch of government. Congressional oversight, the reviewing or monitoring or supervision of federal agencies and activities, is essential to good government. It helps ensure that officials who hold the public trust apply laws fairly and spend their funds wisely, our funds wisely. It uncovers abuse and uproots waste. It encourages efficiency and fosters transparency. Now, this is a two-way street where Congress ends up better informed when making its legislative decisions, and the executive branch is in a better position to carry out its enforcement of our laws. Now, there is a natural and perfectly reasonable push and pull of constitutional and legal interests when two branches of governments interact. But too much pushing or pulling from either side poorly serves the American people and does not serve the work of the American people. Now, each branch of government, and I mean the legislative and executive, have a tremendous amount to lose and a lot to gain in the process. It's in the interest of people at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue and across the country that our institutions and our democracy function properly. Now, Congress and the Justice Department, both where I worked for a long time, have recognized this principle. The Justice Department has attempted throughout the years to balance satisfying legitimate legislative interests with protecting the executive branch's confidentiality interests. An obvious example arises when disclosure of case materials from an open criminal case or civil case might be disclosed to the public or to Congress. There might be a significant public interest in the Justice Department's efforts to protect those materials. Likewise, Congress has a very long history of engaging in responsible oversight, and bipartisan oversight at that matter, of the executive branch. This means reaching accommodations that have regularly included narrowing requests for information, limiting access to information that's provided by the executive branch, or even at times delaying a congressional investigation until the work of the Justice Department in the form of prosecutions or declinations are completed. For instance, here's an example. In the early 2000s, the House Oversight Committee wanted to obtain documents from Special Counsel Patrick Fitzgerald's investigation into the leak of the covert identity of CIA officer Valerie Plame. They consulted, this is the committee, the Oversight Committee, consulted with the Special Counsel and agreed to delay receiving information until after the end of the litigation or after the investigation and litigation. Even then, the chair of the committee worked closely with the special counsel to narrow his requests that the special counsel agreed would not infringe on his prosecutorial independence or intrude upon grand jury secrecy, which, as many of you know, is protected by law, under the law. Both sides here, Congress and the executive branch of the Justice Department, had interests. They both balanced them for the good of democracy, the health of our institutions, and transparency for the American people. Now, as with any process of negotiation, not every party will always receive what they seek to recover, nor will they be able to protect every bit of information they wish to shield. That is not a bad thing, and we will talk about that over the course of the day. Needless to say, thank you again for inviting me to testify, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Ms. Parker, you are recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Parker, hit that button. There you go. Thank you.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, and members of the subcommittee, I would like to thank you for inviting me to come and respectfully speak to you today. The people of this country deserve the right to have faith in those sworn to protect. Faith is the foundation of hope, and hope can be restored through honest reflection of who we have become and who we could and should be. On September 11th of 2001, I was working for Merrill Lynch in the World Financial Center in New York City. I witnessed up close the horrific, deadly terrorist attacks on the adjacent World Trade Center. My colleagues and I evacuated our building and were led to safety thanks to the heroic efforts of NYPD officers. 2,977 souls were not as fortunate that day. As I watched the mayhem unfold to include people jumping to their deaths, I was shocked, heartbroken. I vowed to God that I would give back and serve this great nation. This vow led me to leave a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund in 2009 and apply to become an FBI special agent. According to the Wall Street Journal, around 45,000 people applied to be special agents that fiscal year. About 900 made the cut, and I was one of them. After 5 months of arduous training at the Academy in Quantico, I was a sworn-in special agent assigned to the Miami division. I considered it a very sacred responsibility and was honored to be entrusted to protect and serve the American people. My entire career was spent in the field, where I believed I could make the strongest impact in rescuing victims and putting criminals behind bars. It was my privilege to work alongside the finest and brightest in the FBI, local law enforcement, and our federal partners, participating in the investigations of myriad criminal cases. The Marjorie Stoneman Douglas high school shooting in Parkland, Florida, the 2017 Fort Lauderdale airport shooting, the Cesar Sayoc pipe bomb case, multi-million-dollar Ponzi schemes, crimes on the high seas, bank robberies, murders for hire, sexual assaults, extortions, and more. Yes, it was physically taxing and emotionally jarring, but I believed I was making an impactful difference. And every day I woke up and I embraced being an FBI special agent until things changed. Over the course of my 12+ years, the FBI's trajectory has transformed. On Bureau, the Bureau's mission had remained the same, but its priorities and governing principles shifted dramatically. The FBI became politically weaponized, starting from the top in Washington and trickling down to the field offices. Although FBI employees have their First Amendment rights, they are not at the liberty to allow their personal political views or preferences to determine their course of action or inaction in any investigation. Lady Justice must remain blind. Those that do not uphold these responsibilities cause a negative ripple effect throughout the agency in the field. It's as if there became two FBIs. Americans see this, and it is destroying the Bureau's credibility, causing Americans to lose faith in the agency, and therefore the hardworking and highly ethical agents who still do the heavy lifting and pursue noble cases. It makes it very difficult for agents to do their job when the FBI loses the respect of the American people. There has also been a shift in recruiting practices, a lowering of the eligibility requirements, which is negatively impacting the agency's performance. And all this adds up to a loss of trust in the FBI by many Americans and low morale among many FBI employees. For many, becoming a special agent was their calling in life, but now it's merely a very dangerous and high-risk job with minimal contentment. Wary of consequences that come with voicing their displeasure, these agents keep their heads low. They work hard and they stay off the radar and they count down the days until they can collect their well-deserved pensions. For me, distancing myself from egregious mistakes, immoral behavior, politically charged actions taken by a small but destructive few FBI employees became exhausting. Although I was always treated with the highest level of respect in the Miami division, I no longer felt that I was the type of agent that the FBI valued. I began to lose passion for the career I loved, and peace came as I reflected on the victims I assisted, the criminals I took off the streets, and I remembered positive performance reviews, awards, and accolades I had been given, as I left nothing on the line in my work as a special agent. I held out as long as I could, hoping things would improve, but finally I knew it was time to go. So less than 4 months ago, of my own volition, I made the difficult decision and quietly walked away from the FBI with an exemplary and spotless record. I love the FBI I joined, and I have treasured memories working alongside remarkable people. I'm proud to have served with honor as a special agent. And while I sincerely pray for the FBI's future success, the FBI's troubles of late were bigger than anything I could change. Going forward, I will continue to serve others in our beloved country while honoring and celebrating the true heroes, both past and present, of the FBI. When I was invited to participate in this hearing, my initial reaction was to decline their request, as there may be others more capable who would do a much better job than me. And why would I want to subject myself to the stress of testifying, putting a target on my back, and likely facing public scrutiny? As I prayed about this invitation, the thought came to me: to whom much is given, much is required. And I realized that this is not about me. I have been given the opportunity to speak up on behalf of numerous current and former Bureau employees who feel similarly, but they do not have a voice. I am not here today to show favor to any political party. I am here to stand for the truth based on my experience at the FBI. In all humility, I hope to make an impact in creating a stronger agency, which is what Americans deserve.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Thank you for your service. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Stefanik.
I want to echo the chairman. Thank you, Ms. Parker, for your extraordinary service and your courage for being here today. Mr. Turley, I want to start with you. The Twitter files laid bare for the American people what you correctly call unconstitutional, quote, censorship by surrogate. Matt Taibbi writes, quote, Twitter's contact with the FBI was constant and pervasive as if it were a subsidiary. Do you agree with that assessment?
I do. What we know on the record so far shows a relationship that goes beyond this sort of informal exchange of ideas.
You're correct. In fact, isn't it true that leading up to the 2020 election, Twitter had weekly meetings with not just the FBI, with DOJ, with DHS, with DNI, to conduct this unconstitutional censorship by surrogate? We know that because of the Twitter files, correct?
Correct.
And it was not just meetings, not just censorship of stories like the Hunter Biden laptop story. We also now know that the FBI paid Twitter over $3.4 million of taxpayer funds to censor these stories before the 2020 election. Is that correct?
That money was paid. Twitter confirmed that.
And the Twitter files are just the tip of the iceberg because there's so much more. There was a corrupt revolving door at the highest levels between the FBI and Twitter. Look no further than Jim Baker, former general counsel at the FBI who helped unlawfully investigate Donald Trump in the 2016 election. Or look at Jim Comey's deputy chief of staff, who became the director of strategy at Twitter. Isn't it true, according to the Twitter files, that there were so many FBI officials who then went to work at Twitter that created their own Slack channel and crib sheet for onboarding? The Twitter files confirm that, correct?
Correct.
Are you aware, as the American people are aware, that according to polling, of the people that were made aware of the Hunter Biden laptop story, 53% would have changed their vote, including 61% of Democrats. This is the definition of election meddling, and it's the definition of election meddling by the FBI on behalf of Democrats, paid for by the U.S. taxpayers. It's collusion, it's corruption, and it's unconstitutional. Ms. Parker, I want to go to you next about your experience at the FBI, because this is not just about the Twitter files, which folks are focused on because of the news it made. It's about a systemic rot in the culture and the politicization of the leadership of the FBI, and it needs to be rooted out. Let's take a step back. Let's look at the targeting illegally of parents who wanted to stand up for their kids at school board meetings. On September 29, 2021, the National School Boards Association sent a letter to Joe Biden equating parents at school board meetings to domestic terrorists. And on October 4th, Attorney General Merrick Garland issued a memorandum to the FBI and U.S. attorneys that the department would use federal enforcement tools to target and prosecute these parents. Do you consider parents as domestic terrorists?
I do not consider parents as domestic terrorists. No, I do not.
No, and neither do the American people. But there's more to this story. It goes back further than that initial letter on September 29th, because the letter didn't happen organically. It was solicited. It was solicited by the White House and by the Secretary of Education. Essentially, the Biden administration laid the predicate for which it used to justify illegally targeting the American people, targeting these parents. Is it proper protocol as a former FBI officer to set that predicate, to manufacture the reasoning to justify opening an investigation?
I believe that no one should be targeted for free speech and that violence should never be tolerated under any circumstance, but it should definitely not, no one should be targeted because they want to speak up at a school board meeting.
This was a setup, and it was the setup, and it's the real definition of weaponization of the government against the American people. And it's not just this example of targeting parents at School Boards Association. It goes back to the opening of Crossfire Hurricane. It goes back to the faulty FISA application. It goes back to what we heard on that first panel from Senators Grassley and Johnson. It goes back to the suppression illegally of the Hunter Biden laptop story paid for by the U.S. taxpayers. This corruption needs to be rooted out, and it's not just about protecting the U.S. Constitution. It is most importantly about protecting the American people from the weaponization of the federal government against them. Yield back.
Lady yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very interesting. As a parent of 5 children, I think having my rights as a parent is a very sacred trust, a very sacred trust. But Mr. Williams, would you say that having worked as a prosecutor, threats of violence against individuals is something that supersedes an individual simply being a parent?
Of course, Madam Ranking Member, threats of violence are actionable under the law. When they come, prosecutors can investigate, or the FBI or any other investigative agency can investigate them and prosecute as appropriate.
Sure. This one-page DOJ memo that we've made much ado about says in its first instance that the First Amendment protected activity should never be subject to prosecution, and issues a concern to illegal violence and threats of violence that are made to school board officials, most of whom are, surprise, surprise, parents, volunteers who do the unenviable job of trying to direct their children and their communities' activities with regard to education, a job most of us, thankfully, have not had to do. And I'm also troubled, I'm deeply troubled by all of the events, as well as the increase in violence and threats of violence against civil servants and federal law enforcement as we attempt to weaponize these individuals doing their job. In fact, we've seen the consequences of this rhetoric over and over again.
Oh, Rick, we appreciate you, man. Smash that like and share button and retweet this, please. US, thanks, Rick. Appreciate that big time. Make sure you guys swing over there and follow Kyle as well, as links pinned up at the top. Holy cow, Kyle.
Again, I'm also deeply troubled by the idea of Congress, as I said in my opening statement, using oversight as a weapon to air a list of political grievances. seem to hear much of that from the first panel, especially. I've been a member of the House Oversight Committee, where I saw firsthand how good oversight can help Congress make better public policy. Mr. Williams, you've worked in both Congress and the executive branch. Do you agree with me that oversight of the federal government is an important legislative process?
Absolutely. As Representative Raskin said at the first panel, the Constitution doesn't explicitly lay out an oversight mandate, but the legislative mandate of Congress provides Congress with its ability to engage in oversight. Oversight is good when it helps the government work better.
Thank you. Do you agree that congressional oversight is at its best when it's focused on addressing the real problems that Americans face on every day?
The real problems Americans face every day and making government work better. Absolutely, Congresswoman.
I believe in congressional oversight, and committee Democrats would be willing to work together to conduct oversight of matters such as the disproportionate audits by the IRS of African American families. Recent reports about former Attorney General Bill Barr and Special Counsel John Durham. Mr. Williams, do you agree that congressional oversight works best when it's bipartisan in nature?
Absolutely.
And have you seen examples of that in bipartisan investigations?
Oh, absolutely.
I know that it's so infrequent now, but have you ever seen any?
Absolutely. A great example is in 2016 when the House Committee on Oversight, led by Republican Chairman Jason Chaffetz and Ranking Member Elijah Cummings, worked together on an investigation, a bipartisan investigation of the United States Secret Service and mismanagement and misbehavior there. It led to bipartisan legislation that made, as I said, the government work better and Secret Service a more functional organization.
What about cooperation between the branches of government? Is it necessary for Congress to be willing to work with the executive branch in investigations?
Yes, and vice versa. Absolutely. The executive branch should be willing to work with Congress as well.
And would that first instance be trying to come to agreement as to when and how documents and information could be given?
Absolutely. The public sees hearings, but does not see that when the process works properly, there's a back and forth and a give and take between the two parties at both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, as I said before.
Would you say 2 weeks into the Congress issuing subpoenas might be a bit premature for the investigation and cooperation between those branches of government?
Certainly, Congressman, Congress has the authority to issue subpoenas quickly if they wish, but I guess you get more flies with honey than with vinegar, to be cute. And working with the other side collaboratively is always going to be a better approach.
Vinegar seems to work better on social media, though, than the honey. I yield back.
I think the gentlelady, I would just point out, we tried the honey. 100 letters we sent in the last Congress. We tried the honey.
The last Congress, you're now the chair.
The honey didn't work.
You're now in the majority. You should have tried that first as the chair of this committee, not as the ranking member.
We tried. We
You didn't
tried
do
with
that
100
as
and some
chairman.
letters.
You didn't.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the state of Wyoming, Ms. Hageman.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. It is a privilege to serve on this select subcommittee, and I look forward to the work we have ahead of us. After over 30 years as a water, natural resource, and constitutional attorney, I have seen firsthand and fought against the weaponization of the federal government against my fellow Wyoming citizens and the country at large. Through the testimony of our witnesses today and the points made by my colleagues, it is clear that the culture and mission of the FBI and DOJ has changed in a manner which runs counter to the rights and liberties of the American people. The purpose of government is to secure our natural rights. Yet the testimony we have heard and the information received from the whistleblower.
Yo, Big Drew. Appreciate you, man. Thank you so much. Good to see everybody. Thank you guys for hitting that like button. I appreciate it more than you can ever imagine.
Blowers and other investigative findings has shown that the FBI's mission has moved from securing those rights to using them as a predicate for investigating and surveilling the American people and weaponizing their government structure against them. Mr. Baker, in a Wall Street Journal piece you wrote titled, "The FBI Needs a Ray of Courage," you stated that in response to Attorney General Garland's memoranda directing the targeting of American parents, Director Wray should respond by highlighting that the FBI won't undertake any investigation based on speech alone. It is troubling that statement would even need to be made. But Mr. Baker, do you think your advice was heeded by Director Wray?
Well,
In fact, I remember that episode quite clearly. I wrote that article in October, just days after the announcement became public, and I was in touch with high executives at the FBI a day or two after that. They assured me that the FBI would maintain the standard of only investigating those situations where there was violence and not investigating free speech. I have to accept the ranking members of the FBI who told me that. However, my article in the Wall Street Journal still stands. We needed, the FBI needed, the American people needed to hear Director Wray say that publicly, as other FBI directors have spoke up to previous attorney generals and previous presidents, and he never did, publicly. And the American people need to hear, we wouldn't be having this discussion today if he clearly stated that we will not investigate speech, we'll only investigate violence. We're still waiting for that statement.
Okay. Mr. Turley, from what Mr. Baker just said, we have seen two issues stemming from this abuse and change of priorities within the FBI and DOJ. They are either investigating Americans based upon their constitutionally protected rights, or they are flagging lawful action to which they have political objection. In some of your recent writings, you have identified two very important points from the revelation of the FBI Twitter relationship. First, that this relationship is a First Amendment violation as it constitutes censorship by surrogate or proxy. And second, you also are concerned that you don't know what is more menacing, the role the FBI played in Twitter's censorship program or its response to the disclosure of that role. The Constitution is a limited governance document. The First Amendment identified our God-given right to speak freely and imposes restraint that the government shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Mr. Turley, can you explain the implications of the government relying on private industry to circumvent the First Amendment?
Thank you for that question. The Supreme Court and lower courts have spent a great deal of time trying to define when a relationship with a private party can cross over to a type of agency relationship. And that also applies on the state level through the 14th Amendment. In cases like Page, for example, you have situations where you have a government official who called an employer to say, I don't like what this person said in a public meeting, and that employee was fired. And the court said, you know, that is government action. That is a violation of the First Amendment. One of the things that this subcommittee has to deal with is that difficult line, and I admit it is difficult. But in these Twitter files, there's a very disturbing picture that emerges. You have regular meetings between the FBI and Twitter. They even offered to give clearances to Twitter officials. You have complaints among Twitter employees that this is overwhelming in terms of the number. And what you really see is how insatiable censorship becomes, that eventually they were doing what appeared to be word searches and just sending all of these postings in for possible action by Twitter. And that included things like jokes and other things that anyone looking at it would realize that this is not a nefarious Russian operation. So when we talk about surrogate censorship, we're talking about one of the most serious threats against free speech. You know, people always say, well, you know, the First Amendment only applies to the government. The First Amendment is not synonymous with free speech. It deals with one problem of free speech. What we're talking about with surrogate censorship is a much greater problem for those of us who value free speech as a defining right of this country.
I appreciate that. And one more point to make, they also paid Twitter millions of dollars.
Time has expired.
I will yield back.
Thank the gentlelady from Wyoming, and now I recognize my friend on the other side of the aisle, Mr. Lynch, who worked successfully and diligently with our late friend Walter Jones to secure the release of 28 pages of the 9/11 document. And now I recognize Mr. Lynch for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Williams, on August 12th, 2022, the FBI and DHS released a joint intelligence bulletin warning of an increase in domestic terrorist threats against federal law enforcement officials following the search of Donald Trump's offices at Mar-a-Lago, including, quote, a threat to place a so-called dirty bomb in front of FBI headquarters and issuing general calls for civil war and armed rebellion. On August 9th, at Judiciary, GOP tweeted, "The IRS is coming for you. The Department of Justice is coming for you. The FBI is coming for you. No one is safe from the political punishment in Joe Biden's America," close quote. And on that same day, my colleague, Representative Gosar, my Republican colleague, called the FBI, quote, "the enemy of the people," and tweeted, "We must destroy the FBI," close quote. Do you share my concerns as a former FBI employee about this type of rhetoric inflaming those who might already be inclined to do harm to our federal officers?
Mr. Lynch, above all else, I should take a moment to praise the work of the FBI and the many law enforcement agencies and individuals that I worked with throughout my time, 15 years in government, much of it in law enforcement. They do work on behalf of the American people and frankly don't sign up for threats or abuse. So to answer your question, no, absolutely, the threats hurt and are toxic and corrosive to our democracy.
Is it ever appropriate for American leaders to encourage violence against another branch of government?
The encouragement of violence is never appropriate either as a moral matter.
The school board's issue. On June 22nd, 2021, Loudoun County parent Scott Smith spoke out at his local school board meeting and he was arrested. On September 29th, citing Mr. Smith's arrest as an example, the National School Boards Association sent a letter to the Biden administration requesting federal law enforcement involvement in local school board disputes. Now, here's what's really important. We learned later that the White House helped the NSBA draft that letter to itself. On October 4th, Attorney General Merrick Garland issued the now infamous memo directing federal law enforcement to mobilize against the parents of school children who protest at their local school board meetings. He turned the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the full weight of the Federal Department of Justice against the very citizens they were sworn to defend and protect. On October 12th, we learned that the Loudoun County parent Scott Smith's daughter was actually sexually assaulted at her school and that the school board covered it up, and that was the reason why that dad showed up to protest. 9 days later, October 21st, happened to be the day previously scheduled for Attorney General Merrick Garland himself to appear before our House Judiciary Committee. In that hearing, as my colleagues will remember, he was forced to acknowledge before our committee that the NSBA letter was the basis of his memo targeting concerned parents. But he refused to acknowledge the obvious chilling effect that memo, involving the full weight of the federal law enforcement apparatus, would have on parents' protected First Amendment speech. He also, by the way, refused to commit to a mandatory, under federal law, mandatory ethics review of his own family's financial ties to advancing critical race theory in schools and its relation to his school board memo and the obvious appearance of the conflict of interest therein. I encourage all interested citizens to watch the video of that hearing. It was pretty contentious. The very next day, on October 22nd, after much public outcry, the NSBA retracted and publicly apologized for its letter labeling concerned parents like Scott Smith as, quote, domestic terrorists. In the following weeks, over 20 different state school board associations severed their ties with the National School Boards Association. Our Democrat colleagues have tried to downplay the importance of this select committee and even criticized its name as hyperbolic. But as this example and so many others clearly show, key agencies have indeed been weaponized. We're informed even still today that that memo has not been retracted by the Attorney General. Here's the question, Mr. Baker. You were an FBI agent for 33 years and were involved in a lot of the important and noble work there, but you've also said clearly and been vocal about some of the egregious overreaches you've seen from the FBI and the DOJ. In recent years, you've described what has devolved into a culture of, quote, deceit and deception involving, quote, alarming FBI behavior, and you've written that those abuses threaten the liberties of those on the left as well as the right. Professor Turley just cited statistics here today that there are large numbers of Americans who now distrust the FBI. Our task here is to determine exactly how that's happened and how to correct that framework. Mr. Baker, here's the question. In your testimony, you noted that FBI Director Mueller, a couple of decades ago, worked to centralize the FBI, meaning that he centralized all information and decision-making, making that at the FBI headquarters, as opposed to his predecessor's decentralized model, which empowered the field offices instead. Do you believe the elimination of all those layers of supervision, review, and independent judgment is a key reason for all this corruption we see today, and that it's something that must be reformed and reversed?
Yes, in fact, I do.
Hit that button for me, if you will.
Yes, in fact, I do, Congressman. I don't use the term corruption. The term I think is more appropriate that your colleague, Congresswoman Stefanik, used, the rotten culture, the culture rot. And specifically as regards to centralization, there's no question about it. Traditionally in the FBI, field agent had an investigation. He had a field supervisor above him. Above him was the agent in charge of that office. Only then did the information and the decision-making go to FBI headquarters. What happened under Mueller's centralized thing, all of that was eliminated. They ran these key investigations, the Hillary Clinton email investigation, and then the Trump collusion investigation, out of headquarters, eliminated all these layers of independent judgment, supervision, gone. So you had someone like, somebody mentioned his name already here, Strzok not only writes the communication opening the case, he goes the next day to London and conducts the first interview in the case. You have McCabe, a deputy director, number 2 in the whole Bureau, directs the investigation and sends 2 agents to the White House to interview General Flynn. No levels of review. It was bound to end badly.
Thank you. I'm out of time. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Yeah, they had a name for it. It's called a headquarters special. And the point is, it wasn't special so much, it became the norm. With that, the chair now recognizes...
Mr. Chairman, could I have a point of order? There have been a lot of mention of information and testimony that you all have received from whistleblowers. When are you planning on providing that to the minority?
You could have been for the very first deposition, or excuse me, transcribed interview of the whistleblower. I was there when he testified on Tuesday.
Okay, that's fine. I assume you'll turn those over. But what about, you talk about dozens of whistleblowers. When are we going to get that information?
When they testify, when we work with, I'll work with the ranking member on that information.
You don't have any transcriptions of their interviews?
We have the first one, and we have the dozens who've come and talked to our office.
They talk to your office privately?
They talk to Republican staff, right.
And they're not transcribed, no notes, no nothing?
The first one happened Tuesday.
No, I'm not talking about the first one.
The first one happened Tuesday, the next one happens tomorrow, the third one happens next Wednesday, and we'll continue to do that.
You just said dozens. Do you have notes from those, or they're just talking to you, your staff?
Mr. Chairman, isn't that how whistleblowers typically work?
Well, it's how they're supposed to work. It's not how they worked in the impeachment that Mr. Goldman was a part of when Mr. Schiff said he didn't have contact with that whistleblower, but in fact
Actually,
he did.
it worked exactly appropriately until Mr. Trump would not allow...
We're doing it the way we're supposed to do it, Mr. Goldman.
No, you're supposed to turn it over to the minority.
When they come and testify, you'll have access to the transcript like everyone on the committee will.
You mean your staff is not going to turn it over to our staff? We're just in the dark?
No, when the transcript is done, you will get the transcript.
I mean of the dozens of whistleblowers you have already talked to that came to talk to your staff.
Yeah, what do you want me to turn over there?
Did you...
Their names?
Notes? Anyone take notes?
I'll be happy to talk with the ranking member on how we handle that information.
Thank you.
All I'm telling you is we will schedule each for a deposition, and we are doing that. You didn't show up for the first one, but you could have been there. With that,
I didn't know about it.
The chair now recognizes. The chair now.
Cicilline was there.
There were Democrat members at the.
I think you need to work on your schedule.
The chair now recognizes, I think, Ms. Sanchez, the gentlelady from California, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know from experience how good investigations can really improve public policy.
That Goldman guy's a moron. Now you're going to force Jordan to bring in all the whistleblowers and have him testify on here. Gosh dang, let's get Kyle on here. Everybody should tweet and tag Kyle and tell these guys, tell Jim Jordan that you want to hear from Kyle Seraphin. There is no better whistleblower that they could have testifying right now than Kyle.
In 2009, my investigation shed light on the traumatic brain injury risks that accompany professional football, and I'm proud to say that work changed how football teams and, more importantly, youth sports leagues address concussions. But I have also seen congressional oversight at its worst. I served on the Select Committee on Benghazi, and I saw how politicized and expensive that investigation was, and I want to note again that the final report found no new evidence of wrongdoing. Mr. Williams, you've handled oversight for both Congress and the executive branch. Based on your experience, what are the hallmarks of fair and effective congressional oversight?
Again, fair and effective oversight is number one. Does it serve to make government work and function better on behalf of the American people? And then I would say, two, is there a process of accommodation between the branches of government that are seeking to have information? And in my case, that was the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security, but any government entity, are they working productively together? Those two things.
I'm glad you raised the issue of accommodation process. Can you explain why that's necessary and why the government can't simply comply with every congressional oversight request the moment that it's made?
Sure, and here's an example, Congressman Sanchez. It's actually more efficient in many circumstances for the parties to attempt to come to an agreement prior to whether it's issuing subpoenas or going straight to hearings and so on, because of the fact that things that are more contentious are far more likely to end up in litigation and tied up in the courts for whether it's months or years thereafter. Where if the parties had just at the beginning tried to resolve it, like the judge I clerked for used to say, "Can y'all work this out?" We'll try to work it out up front and come to some agreement where not everybody gets what they were initially asking for, but somehow the process moves forward.
Last week, just 2 weeks after being named chairman, Mr. Jordan served multiple subpoenas seeking internal information from the executive branch. In your experience, can it sometimes take time for the accommodations process to play out?
Exactly, as I said, it can take time, but it's far more productive to end up with a more time-consuming process up front, but where everybody ends up getting what they want.
Thank you. Now, I'm not a prosecutor, but you've been a prosecutor,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah.
The chairman of this select committee held a press conference earlier this week to talk about various interviews that his staff is conducting. Yes. Now, I haven't been able to be in those interviews, but I want to ask you about some things that the committee should keep in mind as it moves forward with our work on this select committee. Could the fact that someone has no firsthand knowledge of the matters they're discussing impact the credibility of what they say?
Yes.
And what if they vocally advocated conspiracy theories that have no basis in fact? Should that impact how the committee views their testimony?
Yes, openly advocating conspiracy theories that have no basis in fact would have a negative impact on an open investigation.
And how many conspiracy theories have you guys heard this year that turned out to not be conspiracy theories?
Right to free speech in this country, but it's not absolute if it includes threats against other people. And it's not just violence that we should be looking out for, but it's also threats of violence that law enforcement should be looking out for.
Absolutely, it's the threats of violence because look, to be quite straightforward, threats of violence lead to violence or can.
Great, thank you. I appreciate your testimony, and I yield back.
Lady yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Mr. Williams, wouldn't the American people feel like this government wasn't so weaponized against them if there wasn't such a revolving door between Department of Justice senior officials and lobbying?
I don't quite follow the premise of your question, sir.
It's pretty easy. There's a revolving door between senior officials at the DOJ and the lobbying profession. Do you think that that gives the public more or less trust?
There are rules governing what employment, and this is based on my understanding, I've been government for 15 years, governing what post-government employment can be. One, what individuals' actions can be once they're employed elsewhere, but also what they're allowed to do.
Lobbying is influence peddling, and you are the principal at the Rabin Group, which is a lobbying firm. And I would observe the reporting of Project Veritas, where Jordan Tristan Walker, who's a director of research and development, said on a recording, one of the things we're exploring is like, why don't we just manipulate COVID ourselves? Mutate COVID via directed evolution. Pfizer is a revolving door for all government officials. It's pretty good for industry, to be honest. It's bad for everyone else in America. Pfizer is one of the clients of the lobbying firm that you're a principal of, isn't it?
I do not represent Pfizer. I do not know.
You're a principal of the Rabin Group, right?
No, that is correct.
Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record the clients of the Rabin Group, which include Pfizer.
Without objection.
Not just Pfizer, but Google as well. And in response to the Twitter files, we saw a statement come from the FBI where they said correspondence between the FBI and Twitter show nothing more than examples of our traditional, long-standing, and ongoing federal government and private sector engagements. Are there such engagements between the FBI and Google?
When you say such engagements, sir, I don't quite
Does Google engage with the FBI, Mr. Williams?
I don't work for either Google or the FBI, sir.
I'd have to again point you to your own client list that you advertise on your own website, which includes Google. Does it surprise you that at the Rabin Group's website, Pfizer and Google are clients?
It does not surprise me, sir, no.
The Soros-funded Open Society is one of the clients as well. Does that surprise you?
Sir, I don't have our client list in front of me right now. I will, assuming that's what it says, I will take your word for it.
Yeah, I would think that maybe one of the legislative initiatives we could pursue would be to tighten this revolving door that folks at Pfizer and folks at big tech seem to freely acknowledge, in which you seem to be the incarnate of the revolving door. Mr. Baker and Ms. Parker, I want to assure you both that we come not to trash the FBI, but to rescue the FBI from political capture. And it seems as though that political capture was really enhanced when Robert Mueller took a lot of the authority and power away from the field offices all over our country and centralized that power. Mr. Baker, do you believe that through legislation we might be able to restore the system of office origin, where events occur, people are able to conduct investigations in the absence of the influences of Washington, D.C.?
There's no doubt Congress can be an advocate. You're doing a lot of good by having these hearings, this panel. A lot of these things, though, have to be done internally by the DOJ and the FBI. But there's absolutely a role for Congress, looking at the abuses of Pfizer for one, the abuses of the unmasking for another, the abuses of the indirect targeting, which actually the CIA and the NSA do rather than the FBI. But these are all things Congress can legislate solutions to.
And it seems as though those abuses become more acute the greater they have a geographic proximity to Washington, D.C. Seems we don't see these abuses with the brave FBI agents like Ms. Parker, who I'm very grateful served my fellow Floridians in the Miami field office. Ms. Parker, if we got the decision-making more out of Washington, D.C. and into the hands of our field offices where we have so many patriotic and brave FBI officials, do you think we'd be able to escape this political capture that quite literally drove you out of the Bureau?
I think that's absolutely critical at this point in our American history. When I mentioned in the opening statement is if there are two FBIs, we in the FBI see it as the field offices, the standard rank and file. We are typically the agents who just came to the FBI to serve the country, protect American citizens, fight crime. We have no interest in politics. We really have no interest in promoting many times. And then FBI 2 is kind of more individuals that are at the headquarters level and sometimes executive roles.
It seems as though that politics isn't out in the field offices. It's here in Washington, D.C., and that's precisely what we ought to deconstruct legislatively. I thank the witnesses, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the state of Florida, Ms. Wasserman Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Williams, do you want to take
retweet.
about 30 seconds to respond?
It won't even take 30 seconds, Congressman. What I would say is if we're talking today about what's within Congress's powers and duties under Article 1 of the Constitution, one such thing is legislation. If Congress wishes to pass bipartisan legislation either about the Federal Elections Commission or lobbying requirements, have at it. That is Congress's role, and work together and do it. I would support it, and I'm sure many people in this room would.
Alas, our first bipartisan agreement.
No, we're in agreement there, I think.
Reclaiming my time.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Not from you. Thank you. First, I want to thank you, Ms. Parker. As a victim of the Cesar Sayoc bomb package case, along with my staff, I appreciate your service and the work that you did in the Miami Bureau. Mr. Williams, you worked in oversight for a long time, as you noted, in Congress for the executive branch. You've seen it at its best and worst. And although the Judiciary Committee has issued subpoenas over unfounded accusations just 2 weeks into this Congress, I know I have serious concerns over their rush to judgment, like many other committee actions that are employed by Republicans for purely political reasons. But their move also clearly shows that when Republicans are in charge, they use the levers of power to weaponize government. So can you tell us some examples of congressional oversight that has been abused in that way?
Well, what I will say, Congresswoman, is that when congressional oversight is abused, history doesn't treat it well. And none of us today are the judge or the guide, but history will be. And if, for instance, individuals are targeted, history will not be the judge of that if Congress is using its authorities to do so and overstep its bounds beyond the scope of its Article 1 authority.
Thank you. And what can members of Congress learn from past examples of the politicization of oversight?
I think past is prologue, and by recognizing that with a large platform as Congress has, it has the tremendous ability to to harm people as much as it does to do good. And Congress ought to perhaps have that in mind when thinking about how to make government work better.
Thank you. In 2015, a member of Congress who happens to currently hold the gavel now in the House boasted that the Benghazi Select Committee was effective all because it hurt Hillary Clinton politically, saying, quote, "Everybody thought Hillary Clinton was unbeatable, right? But we put together a Benghazi Special Committee, a select committee. What are her numbers today?" Unquote. He even bragged in the same statement that because of it, her, quote, "numbers are dropping," unquote. During Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign, Republicans held 9 investigative hearings focusing on her, including one where they called her to testify for over 11 hours. That was clearly politicized and weaponized oversight. And frankly, this weaponization committee itself epitomizes the weaponization of government. So, Mr. Williams, is it ever appropriate to turn congressional oversight authority into a weapon to harm a political opponent?
No.
And how can the politicization of congressional oversight harm the credibility of future congressional investigations?
That's exactly the point I was going to get to, Congressman. If the public loses its faith in Congress's ability to be a fair arbiter of oversight disputes, then what does Congress have ultimately? So
was represented as the report.
Without objection.
Unanimous consent.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, gentleman's recognized for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a Republican staff report from the Committee on the Judiciary dated November 4th, 2022, entitled FBI Whistleblowers, What Their Disclosures Indicate, and ask that the committee also provide a copy to Mr. Goldman so that he might be able to review all the staff notes compiled in the report.
Without objection.
Yeah, baby.
So ordered. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California.
Let's go.
I thank the chairman. Dr. Turley, let me just go back, or Mr. Turley, let me just go back. How many times have you testified before Congress on behalf of all of us? Dozens and dozens and dozens over my 22 years.
I've testified both as a Republican and Democrat witness over 50 times, approaching 60.
So, to use a term of art, you're an expert witness when it comes to evaluating the Constitution and a great many laws and their interpretation.
That's how I've been called. That's why I've been called to this.
And you teach in that role.
I do.
Okay. And I want to thank you because in my 22 years, I have seen you representing both sides many times and normally treated with the respect that your opinions based on your readings or your scholarly work are generally respected by both sides of the aisle, and I thank you for that. You know, this committee is rightfully being talked about, subcommittee, about as weaponization of government, but I just want to clear up a couple of points. The previous operation known as Operation Choke Point, where government limited people's ability actually to have bank accounts, that would be weaponization by government, a decision by government to affect commerce, correct?
Well, it certainly affects commerce. There's no question about that.
Okay, and it's outside what one would think the administrative state has a right to do in any sense. Our liberties include that right to have commerce not impinged by, based on our political views by our government. So, in a sense, the weaponization of DOJ isn't new, is it? It predates this administration and even the previous one.
No, that's true. Some of the darkest chapters in our history have come from the Department of Justice losing that independence and objective element that they pride themselves on. And that goes back to the Palmer raids and even before then. And whenever the DOJ and the FBI has lost its way in that sense, it has come at a great cost to the country as well as the department.
Well, and speaking of lost their way, back in 2010, 2012, with the IRS's targeting of conservative groups headed by Lois Lerner, that certainly limited the free speech of those organizations when they were denied their ability to hold themselves as not-for-profits, correct?
That had serious free speech implications.
So when we look at the weaponization of government, we should not limit it to three-letter words over at DOJ, but in fact, we need to look at government broadly and how it might impinge free speech or our rights to simply have our liberties. And to that extent, we've covered a lot of the FBI, and I think that's important. I'm mentioning the IRS, but behind there, I have a concern about the FBI. Ms. Parker, I've got to go to you. Is that something that you think represents the neutralism of simply being law enforcement for the FBI basically to kneel in support of Black Lives Matter?
That would not be deemed appropriate. They're wearing their official FBI ballistic vests, and although, like we've mentioned, FBI agents, I have the right to my First Amendment thoughts, but I am not at the liberty to express any of my political or social opinions while on the job. I know that in that instance they were guarding our national institutions, and that we heard that they were saying that they were trying to de-escalate the situation, but in those pictures it appears that there are people smiling, clapping. It looked very far from de-escalation to me, but it is not appropriate to make any sort of potentially political or social statement while wearing your FBI ballistic vest on official duty. No, it is not appropriate.
In the decades I served in the Army, we were warned about when in uniform being involved in anything that appeared to pick sides, and certainly they picked a side there. I want to just close my questioning, because we're going to be doing this probably for 2 years, and ask a question again, Mr. Turley. We have this question of government and what it's doing, but a lot of people are talking about how Twitter's a private company, Facebook's a private company. They're all private companies. Isn't it fair to say that from a standpoint of statutory and constitutional history, our government has clearly looked at entities which convey free speech, newspapers, radio, television, and has limited the concentration of power and the concentration of ownership in order to maintain, although private, an ability for all, or at least most, free speech to find an avenue? Isn't that the history that we're also going to have to look at when it's concentrated in just a few companies?
It is, and the fact is that much of our political dialogue now takes place on social media, which has replaced even telephones as a common form of communication. And that's why it is true that private companies can limit speech. But you have to keep in mind, these are communicative companies. These are closer to the AT&T than they are Starbucks. And that raises a serious question in terms of not just looking at the government aspect of coordinating and targeting citizens for possible censorship, but the control of these companies over speech. And I think that people that sort of dismiss that are really losing the fact that this is now much of what is the marketplace of ideas. The marketplace of ideas is now a digital marketplace, and it's controlled by these companies.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm so glad my friend from California just brought up Lois Lerner and the IRS, and your comment, Professor Turley, that was troubling in terms of targeting a particular point of view, because, of course, that's not true. As we learned, the Inspector General, the TIGTA, deliberately focused only on conservative filters, even though he was presented with clear evidence that the filters were nonpartisan. There were liberal filters, lefty filters, conservative filters, Republican filters, Democratic filters, but they chose because they wanted to make a case that this was deliberate censorship and targeting by the IRS. Wasn't true. Never was true. False premise. And the premise is the FBI is tainted. The FBI is doing dirty work. It's got the hobnail boot of government on the necks of the American people who are simply trying to express themselves. Mr. Williams, you think the insurrectionists, thousands of them, who came here, many of them armed, that led to 5 deaths and the storming of the Capitol, to try to prevent the constitutional certification of the counting of the ballots for the President of the United States on January 6, 2021. You think that was nothing more than patriots that got a little carried away and they were just expressing their First Amendment, prosecuting people for it?
Well, certainly, sir. I believe almost 1,000, if not over 1,000 people have been charged with crimes in connection with that day. Several people have now been convicted by juries and also with findings that were affirmed by federal judges of seditious conspiracy. That's using force or threats to impede or delay the execution of laws of the United States. So
I guess I hear you saying we need to make a distinction between the expression of views, which is absolutely protected under the Constitution of the United States, First Amendment, and the use of violence to propound and...
Use of violence.
Correct. In fact, that's illegal.
Correct.
So when we talk about parents just going to school boards, trying to express their concerns, that's true. Many parents go. I was a parent with a kid in a school system. I was a card-carrying PTA member. I certainly testified now and then about the school budget or school issues, but I didn't threaten the lives or families of school board members. I didn't anonymously threaten violence.
Yes.
Would it be wrong for the FBI, under some circumstances, to be called in to look into that for the protection of elected school board members, and for that matter, active parents?
Both the FBI or state and local authorities who also have the ability to investigate violent crime.
So do you think the FBI is the enemy of the American people?
I do not believe, in my experience, look, again, I was in
Do you
government
think
for 15
the
years, I do
FBI
not.
ought to be defunded?
I do not believe the FBI should be defunded.
So,
sir,
for
no.
example, if they were, the Tampa field office that infiltrated and spent 6 months embedded in a network of ransomware gag, Hive, and took it down. Hive is no longer functioning. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That is a very good thing. Look, I was a prosecutor and a senior executive at the Justice Department. Fighting crime is a good thing, and I think we can all agree on that.
I see. So they're not just, censoring free speech. They're actually doing some good things that protect the American people?
Yes.
Would you say that characterizes largely their mission and their function?
In my experience of working with the FBI and other federal law enforcement for years, absolutely, sir, that was my experience.
So we have to put everything in context here. We can't allow somebody who asserts they're up to no good because a particular agent or a couple of agents may be doing X, Y, and Z, ought not to taint the entire function and mission or personnel of the FBI. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement, correct.
And that goes to their other missions: cybersecurity protection, human sex trafficking, breaking up those rings, and for that matter, protecting us from domestic extremists who are propounding and using violence as a weapon to further their cause.
What is special about the FBI, sir, very quickly, is that unlike many other law enforcement agencies, it has both a counterterrorism element and a law enforcement element. Now, many people may think those are all one and the same, but those are actually two different functions. And so, yes, both of those help keep the American people safe.
I thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Stewart, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and to witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Turley. My condolences that you've had to sit through 60 of these, but thank you for being willing to do that. I look forward to hearing from all of you, but Mr. Chairman, I also look forward to hearing others who are key to this investigation. Christopher Wray, the Attorney General, former FBI Director Comey, former CIA Director Brennan. I hope we have a chance to hear from them as well. I want to share with you my first experience in this area. 2017, member of the House Intelligence Committee, after months and months of stonewalling, we were finally allowed to go to the FBI building and to read the FISA application on Carter Page. And after reading that application, it was very, very clear to me the FBI has lied to the FISA courts. The FBI has lied to Congress, and the FBI has lied to the American people. After that, I had a similar experience with some CIA documents and then other agencies. And the result of this is when, Mr. Turley, you talk about losing the faith of the American people, if an FBI agent called me today and said they wanted to speak with me, I would never speak to them, regardless of the topic, without my attorney present. And by the way, Congress has to reauthorize 702 this year. And we are a long way away from getting the trust of confidence because of the subject we're talking about today. And we'll lose a valuable tool if many people are simply going to say, we won't give them that authority, they abuse it. I'd like to focus on the FBI abuse if I could. I'd remind you, Carter Page was an innocent American citizen. The FBI said he was a Russian spy. Turned out that was not true. In fact, turned out there was zero evidence that he was a Russian spy.
And yet, the FBI IG went and looked at the FISA application, and this is what they found. And Mr. Williams, I hope you'll pay attention to this because I'm going to ask you a question about this. They found 17 significant errors or omissions. They found 51 wrong or unsupported factual assertions, including FBI lawyers who simply made up evidence and included it in the FISA application. Disgusted by this, I would suppose, the IG went and looked at random 25 other FISA applications and found significant inconsistencies and omissions in every one of them. Mr. Baker, you're a former FBI agent. Do you think that 17 omissions, 51 wrong assertions in a FISA application that, by the way, if you're going to get one right, don't you think the one that's targeting the President of the United States would be one you'd be particularly careful of? And yet they found that many omissions. Do you find that a standard acceptable?
Of course not, Congressman. And in fact, it's actually even worse than you described. There was exculpatory information available that was not considered. Some of the information that was considered, we now know from the Steele dossier was false.
That's right, and the list goes on.
But even beyond that, the fact is that individual American, that U.S. person, Carter Page, should not have been subject to that FISA surveillance because he was an individual who, this is all on the public record now, had cooperated with the CIA and the FBI in previous investigations. So he would, by the guidelines that existed then, he should have been excluded from FISA. He could have been directly interviewed.
That's right. Mr. Baker, I'm going to cut you off because you've made your point. Mr. Williams, do you think that, as I've described to you, 17 omissions, 51 wrong assertions in one FISA application is professionally done?
Sir, I would say that this is a matter that continues to be of interest to the Justice
It's a
Department.
simple question. Do you find that acceptable? I think it's hilarious that you won't say, no, I don't.
What I'm saying, sir, is that this is a matter before the Justice Department and Congress that has been ongoing for years.
Okay, so you won't answer the question.
What I will say is that it makes sense for you to direct the question to the Justice Department.
I'm asking your opinion. I'm not asking for any insight into their investigation. I'm asking for a simple opinion. Do you find that acceptable?
What I will say, as is
never
my
mind.
opinion,
Do not answer the question.
I think he's answered.
Because of this, the FBI initiated reforms. And you know what they were? Trainings. Here's some trainings for senior FBI officials. Training number 1, don't lie to FISA courts. Training number 2, don't make things up. How about training number 3, don't hide evidence. That's what senior officials in the FBI did. And if I wish I had more time, I'm almost out of time, because I would come to you and ask, first, Mr. Williams, I'd come back one more time and ask you if you find that acceptable or not, but we won't waste time with it. I would ask, how do we restore faith in the FBI? Because we want to trust the FBI. And people say you're going after the FBI. What nonsense. We're trying to protect the FBI. I know FBI agents who are deeply offended by what they see. They want us to hold them accountable, and that's what the committee is going to do. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It pays to do a lot of listening, and what I've heard is a lot of discussion about this memo. And we ought to really take a look at it. In fact, it's on the FBI website right now. You can pull it up as I talk. And, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter that memo into the record. Thank you. So what do we really have here? I've read the memo. I recommend we all do. It starts off in the first paragraph making it perfectly clear that 1, the lawful First Amendment protection activity should never be subject to persecution. Prosecution. That's the free speech piece right there in the very first paragraph of the memo. And 2, the actual issue of concern in this memo is the illegal violence, which has been discussed by several of you as totally illegal, or threats of violence. So let me be very, very clear here. We have myriad examples of extraordinary, serious, violent threats targeting school board officials that should be of concern to everyone in this room and all of my colleagues. Behind me are just 3 of the written examples that were of concern to the FBI. 1, quote, "It's too bad that your mama is an ugly communist whore. If she doesn't quit or resign before the end of the year, this nation." That we're dangerous.
Of people in this country working at the FBI, wondering, are these folks serious enough that I could be a whistleblower, that I could come forward and share information with them and they would actually do something with it and that something good could come from it. And I want to let those people who are watching, Ms. Parker and Mr. Baker, you're an excellent example of people who will come forward and make a difference. And I want to let those people know that I've come to this city for 10 years with one basic premise, which is this is the best country on the planet, the best country that's ever been. It's deeply flawed, but we owe it to our children to fix it. And that's why I sought to be on this committee. And that's why I thank you, Mr. Baker, and you, Ms. Parker, for being here, and why I invite others who are watching to please come to us. Find somebody on this dais that you trust and tell us your story so we can fix it. And speaking of fixing things, I want to talk about the FISA program, which, Mr. Baker, you've talked about in your testimony, particularly 702 parts of it that we are going to re-examine and reauthorize potentially. On the surface of it, it sounds like a practical legal concept that you would collect information on foreign targets who don't have constitutional rights, and you might incidentally collect information that pertains to U.S. citizens who do have constitutional rights. But because it was collected incidentally and not in pursuit of that U.S. person, oh, we'll go look at this data, we'll put some policies and procedures, but the Constitution does not apply here because it was incidentally collected. Well, if the incidental collection were small enough, that might be a valid concept. The problem is we've collected millions of exabytes of data. When what you're collecting incidentally becomes the entire universe, I think you might need a warrant to go look at that information. And when the number of searches that is done on U.S. persons by the FBI, I'm not talking about CIA, NSA. We know in 2020 it was over 1 million searches into this phishing, into this database where you don't need a warrant. And then in 2021 it went from 1 million to over 3 million searches. This is problematic, and I hope we look at this going forward. Mr. Baker, you mentioned something in your written testimony I don't think you got a chance to speak about here today. Can you tell us what reverse targeting is and
Yes.
why we might want to be concerned about that?
Yes, and it's not well understood, but in a nutshell, here it is. The CIA and the NSA are forbidden to target Americans, as you know. They often, and as you said, the numbers are in vast numbers where they pick up Americans most of the time just by incidental collection, and the Americans are not really doing anything wrong. If they pick up information that an American is breaking the law or is somehow a threat to national security, those other agencies, the CIA and the NSA, are supposed to provide that information to the FBI for appropriate action, and action can't be taken on it. But in reverse targeting, which John Brennan, during the Russian collusion thing, acknowledged they were doing, they would target a foreign person who was close to an American they were really interested in. And then when they picked up that information on the Americans, aha, we got it in incidental collection, which that was all phony and false. It wasn't incidental collection at all. That is another thing that you in the Congress, on both sides of the aisle, can address and correct. You can institute penalties for them pulling this monkey business like that.
Mr. Turley, Professor Turley, I know we don't have a lot of time, but do you think, and obviously private companies don't infringe the First Amendment until the government tells them to do it. Do you think that Section 230 gave them some comfort that if they did that, that these private companies, if they sort of, when the government suggested to do something, that they did it, that they would have a safe harbor?
Well, I do think that Section 230 is becoming increasingly untenable. It was really designed on the premise that these social media companies and other platforms were not in an editing function, that they were simply a forum, a publisher. That's clearly not the case. I mean, we obviously have an extensive censorship system here that is in place. And so the premise of 230, I think, has largely been discarded. But the implications of what has been created cannot be really overstated. We're talking about a censorship system that affects billions of people, and we also have a confirmation in the Twitter files of the United States government pinpointing people who should be censored or suspended. That should trouble people regardless of your party affiliation, whether you want the government in that business. And I think that's worthy of a debate.
I thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Allred.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I've worked hard now in my 5 years, going in my 5th year in this body, to develop a reputation and a record of bipartisanship, of working on issues like veterans' health care and benefits, on infrastructure, on paid leave, trying to improve folks' lives. To me, this subcommittee and this hearing is a disgrace. It has nothing to do with helping Americans struggling to seek information consistent with our obligation to protect executive branch confidentiality interests. They said the department's mission is to independently and impartially uphold the rule of law, requires us to maintain the integrity of our investigations, prosecutions, and civil actions, and to avoid even a perception that our efforts are being influenced by anything but the law and the facts. Despite that, the chairman of this committee has sought to seek numerous documents related to the FBI's ongoing investigations into the January 6th Capitol insurrection cases and other domestic terrorist cases, many of which are open investigations and are ongoing. Mr. Baker, just to set a tone here, do you agree that the attack on the Capitol on January 6th was an act of domestic terrorism?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Do you agree the attack on the Capitol on January 6th was an act of domestic terrorism?
So while this clown's talking, we're gonna do that $50 airdrop for anybody that retweeted the link above. So if you retweeted the link above, type Trump into the chat, all caps, and we'll pick a winner right here.
I don't think I'm in a position to judge that. It was an act of lawlessness. There was a lot of property destroyed.
You're here as an expert,
and there were
sir.
crimes committed
based on your experience.
by trespassing. I don't know if that rises to the level of terrorism, quite frankly. It might,
Well,
but I don't know
what
that.
would constitute domestic terrorism to you, sir?
Domestic terrorism is acts of violence to influence political decisions. That's what we
You know
were told
what we
in the
do on
past.
January 6th every 4 years in this
Well,
country?
January 6th to me looked like a riot.
It was a seditious
It was lawless.
conspiracy.
It was lawless. There was property destroyed. There was trespassing. There were people injured. Those are all crimes.
Thankfully, numerous courts and juries have disagreed with you and have found many of those insurrectionists guilty. It was an act of domestic terrorism, and I thank you for clarifying for all of us here that you can't decide whether it was or not. I want to go to you, Mr. Williams, because I think that we need to be very careful here. Nobody really wants members of Congress or politicians jumping into ongoing criminal investigations for many good reasons that I think you lay out in your testimony. Can you give us just a few reasons of why it would be a major problem for criminal investigations to suddenly be subject to the whim of a politician?
I'd say 3 reasons, Congressman Allred, and thank you for that question. One, as articulated in the letter by the Deputy Attorney General that was quoted by, I believe it was Congressman Raskman earlier, you do not want the public to get a roadmap for how investigations are going to play out. That involves tipping off witnesses or defendants who might be brought into the system. So that's point one. You just don't want to give the roadmap, and that's the word used by the Justice Department. Number 2, and this is a big one, the fear of influence or the appearance of influence. If a prosecution continues right after a member of Congress or someone speaks out, the public is left with the perception that Congress, in effect, had its thumb on the scale of a federal prosecution, and that's problematic. And finally, everyone is entitled to a presumption of innocence. The Justice Department takes very seriously the idea that naming or outing people who are not themselves yet criminal defendants is incredibly problematic, dangerous, in a profound manner. So those 3.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I yield back.
I think the gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Turley, I saw the effort to discredit you by a member on the other side sort of go down in flames. I don't think much else needs to be said about that. But, you know, I think what is interesting about what you've written and then in your testimony about the Twitter files and your tentative conclusion about what they may indicate, is a product. First, it bears repeating. I mean, you said there that it, quote, could well constitute the largest censorship program ever run by the government of the United States. And I think what attracts you is there is a body of evidence. It is not accusations, it is evidence that we would not have but for the voluntary, it may be extraordinarily unlikely, voluntary act of a very wealthy American who had the will and interest to purchase that company and then disclose what its files hold. Here's what's notable. We didn't get any information about what the FBI and the CIA and the ODNI and GEC and all these other agencies are engaged in from those agencies. The American people wouldn't know but for Elon Musk's disclosures and the independent journalists who then used them. You've talked a little bit in response to earlier questions about how there might be enough evidence there, or in other evidence we might be able to get of a like kind, to suggest an agency relationship between United States government agencies, the FBI, and these social media platforms that would cross the First Amendment line and violate the rights of Americans whose content was flagged for taken down. And that may well be, but it seems to me there's another angle to this. Everybody knows in the debate over big tech that these social media platforms have content moderation policies that are narrower than the First Amendment. They take down speech as a matter of practice that the First Amendment would protect if it were a government. In fact, a lot of people say, well, they can do that, they're private businesses. The question that gets at me is this: how could the FBI, which is sworn to protect the Constitution, ever justify using intense application of its resources, agents, etc., to urge social media platforms to use those standards to take down speech that the Constitution protects?
Yeah, this goes to the sort of bifurcated issue here legally. That is, you have on one hand the question of the agency relationship, which actually some courts like the Eighth Circuit and Dawson, the Sixth Circuit and Page have had analogous cases where they said that there was an agency when a government official made a call and negative actions were taken. But there's also the direct action. Obviously, federal agents are government actors. And in these cases, you have the agency identifying American citizens and others for their viewpoints and saying, we think these people should be suspended or removed. And as I say in my testimony, it's a particularly ominous thing to have the chief law enforcement agency performing this role, an agency with incredible powers. But this wasn't the normal situation of a public affairs office where someone says, look, the FBI did this, and the public affairs office says, you know what, that was a state raid. We weren't even in that issue.
They did it in private.
Right, here you had the government itself looking for citizens who should be silenced and targeted. That's a problem in and of itself. Whether it also triggers an agency relationship, do we want to go back to the day when governments created those types of lists?
Let me get you to comment on something else that I believe is ominous. It's on the charts behind me. One of the Twitter file disclosures is that Elvis Chan at the FBI San Francisco wrote to a Twitter executive and said, "My colleagues at the fort had a query for you." Turns out they had to tell me that means Fort Meade, the National Security Agency, NSA, probably. A few years ago, Twitter said they would no longer provide their data feed to members of the IC. That means intelligence community. And he goes on to ask whether colleagues at the NSA want to know if they'd reconsider that, because the NSA would like to vacuum up every word mentioned on Twitter by American citizens to be analyzed by computers to figure out what they would make of it. What about that? You don't comment on that in your column, but I'm curious what your impression is of that.
Well, that's another troubling aspect of this interstitial relationship between the government and social media companies. Now, on some occasions, the social media companies said, we're not going to do that. But all these different layers of interaction that the Twitter files refer to make it harder and harder to discern where the government ends and the social media company begins. And I want to emphasize that when I talk about the largest censorship system in history, that is really unquestionable, right? I mean, even Twitter alone is a massive censorship system. And you combine the other companies. Now, it is privately run, and now we're looking at how much of that was being directed or influenced by the United States government. But we are, without question, talking about the world's largest censorship system. And when you add elements like the one that you talked about, of this sort of interstitial relationship or cross-pollination between agencies and social media, it becomes a very menacing prospect. These companies are enormously powerful. They control much of our political speech. And as we talk about the dangers to democracy, and I agree with many of the Democratic members and the Republican members about the need to protect our democracy, that's a threat to democracy. When you have the ability of people to speak and control of companies that are using standards that are really undiscernible. Yesterday, when we heard the testimony of one of the Twitter executives, she gave a standard for which they would decide what could be censored. I wrote about it today on the blog. That standard defies definition. And I will simply say that the greatest danger of the First Amendment is the chilling effect, the unknown of when you will be targeted.
I regret my time's expired, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. We now recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chairman, I just promoted you this afternoon.
Being called worse.
And it did not take 15 rounds of voting to do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our ranking member for her steadfast leadership in pursuing truth and protecting our democracy. The federal government has a long history of weaponizing its power against minorities like communities of color, religious minorities, and immigrant communities. Women, Latinos, people of color, and religious minorities are the actual victims of a weaponized government, not billionaires or politicians with frail egos. House Democrats spent 4 years fighting to enhance civil rights and liberties and stop the weaponization of government against our most vulnerable communities. Now my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have assembled this misnamed and misguided committee to grandstand and to try to lecture us all on the weaponization of government. But the American people know that this committee and MAGA Republicans are all about all show and no substance, or as we say in Texas, all hat and no cattle. This committee is designed to inject extremist politics into the justice system and to shield the MAGA movement from the legal consequences of their actions. These political stunts undermine our every agent, officer, prosecutor, law enforcement, and the entire justice system. We should instead dedicate some time to oversee direct interference in prosecutions and investigations. We should instead dedicate our efforts to investigating the abuse of power, the president's pardon power by the former twice impeached president. We should instead dedicate time and efforts to investigate the weaponization of the federal government to undermine and overturn the 2020 presidential election. I hope Mr. Chairman, that we will have follow-up hearings to do some of that. Now I ask for unanimous consent to enter a letter from Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington outlining these and other recommendations for this committee into the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During the assault on the Capitol, which we've already discussed, many of us, including myself, were removed from the floor and evacuated. A lot of things happened, and I, for one, consider it more than just a riot. Some have suggested that this committee may try to erase the truth about the horrible days of that event. The idea of denying the truth about January 6th is horribly offensive to me, and I'm sure that it's even more offensive to the law enforcement officers who were on duty that day. Mr. Williams, I know you're familiar with that day, and you're familiar with the halls of Congress. You worked on the Hill, correct?
I did, Congressman, thanks.
Were you there on the Hill on January 6th?
I was not present on the Hill on January 6th.
Do you know others who were?
I certainly do.
Can you understand why it would be offensive to the people who were there, many like me who were on the floor and got pulled out, had to try to put on a gas mask and told to hit the floor? And of course, the many law enforcement officers who had to rise to the duty. Can you figure any way that we can defend this if anyone tries to rewrite what happened that day?
It's the second part of your sentence that I want to pick up on, Congressman, because it's not just former colleagues and friends of mine that were here. It is law enforcement officers that I know, and there simply is no place for threats against law enforcement in a civil society. So,
yeah, not even when they were FBI agents dressed as Trump supporters or undercover FBI informants dressed as Trump supporters on J6. Not when they opened the doors. Well, what do you guys think about the fact that the FBI said that there was no insurrection? They literally just released a report that the FBI said that there was no insurrection on January 6th. The doors were open to the Capitol building, which we the people own, and everybody walked through the doors peacefully. Now, there were some people that got crazy and rowdy and broke some windows out. Can't blame them.
you know, I will echo everything you said. It was real. 1,000 people have been charged with crimes. Several have been convicted of very serious crimes. It was a real event.
So what is your reaction to the politicization of January the 6th?
I think, as a general matter, Congress works at its best when working in a bipartisan manner, and I think that becomes even more acute when talking about violent crime or threats or terrorism, as the word was used.
Let me ask Pfizer and Google to see what they think really quick. So right now, somebody just asked about the markets crashing. So we have the S&P peaked out. You know, we just got rejected up here. We broke over the upper trend line. And if you follow the ABC setups that Kite trades, you can see that we literally are just breaking below the A. So if we break this support here, we have no support for the S&P down to this area, down to 37. And if we break that, which I think we're going to, I really think that this is going to be the mother of all crashes. That's in the works. That's happening right now. There's no stopping it. Banks are running out of money. If you don't have cash on hand, you guys should seriously start considering getting a little bit of cash on you, because when the banks close, and they have many of times, you guys remember the 2007, 2008? Well, this crash that's coming is going to be 100 times worse than that. That was just the housing market collapsing. We're talking about the sovereign debt bubble. Our Pentagon is missing $2 trillion. We're funding wars that we want nothing to do with. The economy's collapsing, the housing market's collapsing, the used car market's collapsing, food's at an all-time high, inflation's running rampant, and the Federal Reserve still has $2 trillion sitting in the overnight repo. And I can't stress this enough. When this money leaves this repo, and at any time, if the Fed just wanted to go, you know what, we're going to end this reverse repo because the American taxpayers, in theoretically, are paying the Federal Reserve that is bankrupt and completely out of money. Meaning they don't have any money on the books, meaning we have to fund the Federal Reserve right now, and the American taxpayers are funding it. So if they decide that they don't want to pay 4.5% interest on this $2 trillion, overnight, all this money is going to fly out into circulation. And when you release another $2 trillion out into the market, oh my gosh, look out, guys. So I don't know. I think everybody should have at least $5,000, $10,000 cash on them, just in case you go to the bank and you can't get into your bank account, like they have before in the 2008 crisis. You guys remember that, when there was lines wrapped around Bank of America and people couldn't get in? Yo, Folk TV, welcome back, homie. I appreciate you guys. Thank you guys all for staying members. I know I haven't been live much lately, but I appreciate you guys big time. Shut up, lady. Yeah.
But there is an inverse relationship to the power of government and the freedom of the individual. That is why James Madison, along with other like-minded members of the House, as well as President Washington, encouraged the passage of a Bill of Rights, defined, enumerated rights that citizens of our new nation could point to when governments begin to trifle with their lives, their businesses, or their faith. They passed the Bill of Rights in the first session of the first Congress, arguably the most important action ever done by this body for the American people. Their actions were revolutionary. No government on earth has a founding document that has aged as well as ours. It is the oldest and least amended Constitution in the world. And what we are charged to do on this committee is defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to ensure that our citizens' life, liberty, and property are protected from the warrantless abuses of federal bureaus and their agents. Today, we are answering the call to investigate and ultimately stop the litany of dangerous and unconstitutional actions. Truthfully, the list is exhausting, and I'm sure that there is far more that we can address here today, or even in the 2 years that we have. So while Washington, Madison, and Jefferson are no longer here to help guide us in this body, their spirit lives on. It is absolutely crucial that we today take up this mantle. It is the work that will be done by this committee, not as Republicans, not as Democrats, but as Americans, that is important and will live on. Mr. Williams, you just told this committee to be cute, quote, "You get more flies with honey than vinegar." On your Twitter feed, you called the January 6th Select Committee to publicly hammer and shame former Deputy Attorney General Jeff Clark on everything that he attempts to plead the Fifth about. Is that your version of honey or vinegar?
That's my version of stating when an individual has provided.
No, just honey or vinegar.
I don't think it's a binary.
Okay.
If you look at the
all right.
context
so
of all of my tweets.
You also just told Representative Sanchez a few minutes ago that one of the hallmarks of good oversight is bipartisan, and it's designed to, quote, "improve government process," end quote. You went on to say that threats are not protected speech. You yourself were extraordinarily critical of Justice Brett Kavanaugh, going so far as to say publicly on your Twitter feed, and you were not shadow banned, however, but when you said this, that the FBI dropped the ball when vetting him. When there was an assassination attempt on his life, you were unusually quiet. Up to that point, you had tweeted about him 17 times. I hope you, along with our Democratic colleagues, would agree that violence in political discourse is unacceptable, and I would encourage you to do better. That's the statement, not a question. Moving on, Professor Turley, the Constitution was written to limit the power of the federal government and to protect the rights of citizens, yes or no?
Yes.
You've written extensively about the abuses of the federal government. Would you say that these abuses occur within a variety of different agencies, yes or no?
Yes.
Are there not massive national security implications as a result of the extensive amount of warrantless data collection by the federal government agencies, coupled with the disastrous track record that they have of leaks and breaches, that Americans are not only being targeted domestically by the agencies, but also by bad actors and foreign actors?
Well, there are massive constitutional concerns there with the collection of data. There's no question about that.
But with all the breaches and leaks,
yes,
there is a national security implication, is there not?
There can be.
Thank you. It is publicly documented the reference of use of force capabilities within a litany of different agencies, including the Department of Education, the IRS, HHS, even the EPA. Can you detail why the capability, coupled with extensive warrantless data collection efforts of these agencies, should concern everyday Americans, and why agencies like the Department of Education and the EPA are purchasing millions of dollars worth of ammunition and tactical ballistic gear?
Well, I testified earlier on the use of national security letters and other means to get information below the warrant level. And that covers a huge amount of information that the government has gathered. And I thought there was actually fairly bipartisan support on that Democratic and Republican members were equally concerned about the circumvention of warrants in that sense. I think it's a very serious problem. And to the credit of social media companies, they actually have pushed back on this. mean, one of the things in the Twitter files that I noted was that some of that dealt with these types of efforts to get access to social media companies. But most of the time, these companies are really hamstrung when they get these letters, and there's a lot of them, to turn over this information. And citizens are unaware of that. And a lot of what we have that we can hold most dearly in terms of private information is now on our cell phones, it's now on the cloud. And the government has really targeted the cloud. I mean, they're going after the cloud with non-warrants. And in the previous hearing, I was really gladdened because Democrats and Republicans joined together and said, this is a problem. And I think it still is a problem.
I appreciate it. My time has expired. I yield.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a committee menacingly called the weaponization of the federal government. Mr. Turley, have you ever worked for the federal government?
Yes.
What did you do?
I did a couple of years off and on with the NSA as a lowly intern. I also worked in the legislative branch in various capacities. I represented Congress in court.
But that's not working for the federal government. You were an intern.
Well,
Okay.
no, I wasn't an intern. I was representing them.
I understand. You were an intern at NSA. That's the extent of your federal government experience. Is that
No,
right?
I think Congress is part of the federal government. And
You represented Congress. You didn't work for Congress.
well, they paid me. That's my standard. But also, I also worked for.
All right,
I
I'm going
also
to
worked
reclaim my
in the
time. Let's move on because I have a lot to cover. You've commented a lot on the First Amendment today. Do you think that Special Counsel Mueller's indictment of members of Russian intelligence for interfering with the 2016 election through social media was improperly charged?
Well, it depends. I have to look at which case you're talking about, but I supported Mueller's appointment as special counsel.
I'm talking about the indictment.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, I don't remember being upset with those indictments. But
Well, what they did and what they alleged is that Russia interfered in our election through using speech via social media.
Right.
Now, do you think that the First Amendment protects people from making death threats against federal officials across state lines?
No. If it's a
Does the First Amendment protect someone from yelling fire in a movie theater?
Well, unfortunately, that one is not yes or no, because that's become a mantra for people. It's the Holmes Schenck line. Holmes himself walked back on that.
All right.
Holmes and
We don't need a law class here.
that's
But
all
you
I
do
can-
agree, though, don't you, that the First Amendment does not protect all speech?
No, there are limits to speech. All constitutional rights have limits.
Right. Mr. Baker, I want to turn to you. When did you retire from the FBI?
I retired from FBI employment in about 20 years ago. And
1999, right? It's a year.
Yeah, and I've continued to be engaged with the FBI on a number of levels since then.
Okay. So you retired 2 years before 9/11, right?
That's correct.
All right. And are you aware that one of the reasons that 9/11 occurred was that the FBI and the intelligence community did not coordinate sufficiently? Would you agree with that?
That's a conclusion of the September 11th Commission, and it's very valid, I think.
And so you read that like I did, and that's all the information that you had because you were
Yes.
not at the FBI.
And
And
what's
as a result of 9/11, that the Department of Homeland Security was created, right?
A year or two after that, yes.
So you never worked in conjunction with the Department of Homeland Security when you worked for the FBI, right?
I was working as a consultant during
When
most
you
of those
worked for the
years.
FBI, when you were paid by the FBI as a special agent, did you work with Homeland Security?
No, it didn't exist.
Okay. And you never investigated foreign interference in our elections, did you?
No, I personally did not.
And you have no experience investigating Russia's efforts to interfere in our elections through cyber attacks and social media, do you?
Other than what I've studied and researched.
Okay. And in 1999, when you left, did smartphones exist?
Of a sort.
Really?
Yes.
What?
Well, we had phones. We had phones in
Smartphones.
cars.
Do you know
We
what a
had-
smartphone
we had,
is? Okay.
Well,
Did you ever do any search warrants for emails?
search warrants for
Emails.
No, I did not.
Did you ever investigate domestic extremism?
Actually, yes. I investigated the Ku Klux Klan on many occasions.
Good.
I would
Did
call
you ever
those-
investigate any insurrections on the Capitol?
No, there was none.
Okay. And I appreciate that your service, sir, but you would agree that a lot has changed in the FBI in the 23 years since you left, correct?
good and bad, and I have stayed engaged on a number of levels.
One last question, sir, for you. I read that your opening statement is actually an excerpt from your book. Is that right?
Well, it covers some of the same territory, yes.
All right. Well, next time, make sure you give us a heads up and we can set up a table for you to have a book signing after this. Ms. Parker, real quick, do you think that you speak for, you said that Americans are concerned about the FBI. Do you think you speak for every American?
I do not speak for every American, but as a special agent who's been out in the field trying to conduct my job, it's very difficult when we don't have the buy-in of the American people, and a lot of Americans do not trust the FBI anymore because of recent...
Well, unfortunately, my time is about up, but I will also say to you that I worked in the Department of Justice for 10 years alongside a lot of FBI special agents. And their biggest concern and the most damage to the morale of the FBI occurred after Donald Trump started attacking the FBI because he was being investigated by the FBI. And that is what this subcommittee is all about. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. I disagree with his conclusion. We will now recognize the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Shouting fire in a crowded theater was dicta in a 1919 case by Schenck. It was overruled in 1969 by Brandenburg and put in an imminence requirement. So if we're going to continue to use it in this setting, whether it's the Twitter hearing yesterday or the hearing here today, let's at least get the law right. Secondly, as somebody who spent the first 10 years of my life defending criminal cases in both state and federal court, I think the genesis of the Garland memo is incredibly important. The point of the coordination between the DOJ, the Department of Education, and the National School Board Association was designed to create a federal nexus. Local school board incidents are prosecuted locally. We elect local sheriffs, we elect local prosecutors, we elect local judges. Only by fabricating a domestic terrorism nexus do you create a position where you can prosecute those cases in federal court. But I don't want to talk about that because I think we do have to talk about things more than the First Amendment. The timestamp data provides an intimate window into a person's life, revealing familial, political, professional, religious, and sexual associations. Only the few without cell phones could escape this tireless and absolute surveillance. Those are quotes from the Supreme Court's majority opinion in U.S. v. Carpenter. And while Carpenter is a limited ruling addressing warrantless monitoring of cell site locations under the Fourth Amendment, the court began considering whether the law needs to adjust to a digital world with extensive data collection and the analytical tools to operationalize that data. The federal government has realized the value of the massive amounts of commercial consumer data that is freely available on the open market. The data is produced to inform on aggregate population levels, but it also generates leads that produce investigations into individuals. In 2020, the CDC purchased cell phone location data from a data broker to monitor whether or not people went to church during quarantine. In 2020, the DoD obtains consumer data from a Muslim prayer app. In 2020, the Department of Homeland Security purchased cell phone location data to make enforcement decisions on the U.S.-Mexican border. In the summer of 2020 and the turn of the year in 2021, DOJ obtained cell phone location data on Black Lives Matter protests and every cell phone in and around the Capitol on January 6. 2022, several law enforcement associations publicly opposed a bipartisan data privacy bill because it would disrupt the ability to easily obtain certain consumer data. And in 2023, just this week, the IRS proposed comparing a waiter's reported income from tips to the tip data that's submitted by their employing restaurant. You may agree with some of these, you may disagree with some of these, but here's the thing. None of these third-party data acquisitions required a warrant. The amount of data available either directly or through third parties is both astounding and terrifying. Combine that with the advance in technology like AI, facial recognition, and more that will allow aggregation, analysis, and identification, and we are fast approaching a surveillance state with no assurances other than the promises of our government that it will not abuse this tremendous responsibility. Pegasus spyware, FISA abuses, alleged COVID vaccine databases, and even home temperature controls have already shown that the trust alone is not enough. Oren Kerr, a law professor and Fourth Amendment expert, has suggested that when technological change or societal practice significantly alters the balance of power in favor of the government, the law must change. Kerr calls it an equilibrium adjustment. The Carpenter opinion referred to it as not mechanically applying to the third-party doctrine. I would call it ensuring the Fourth Amendment can survive the 21st century. Mr. Turley, do you think we need legislative reforms in Congress suggesting this aggregate collection of data?
I do. You know, Congress has struggled with this in the past. The courts have struggled with it. You know, in Carpenter, the court said that you couldn't get just cell phone locational data without a warrant. It kept alive the Smith v. Maryland third-party standard with that exception. But Roberts, in that opinion, said, look, this is a serious amount of data that's highly personal for individuals, and it triggers the warrant requirement. You also had the court in Jones with the GPS decision in 2012, where that was actually observable movement of a car, and the court still said, you know what, this needs to have a warrant. So the courts have been trying to get their hands around this thing, but it hasn't really materialized in protection. So that falls to Congress as to what you can do about it. And I think there's a lot you can do about it. You can restrict these federal agencies. You can force them to satisfy a higher standard. And I honestly think that there would be general agreement on both parties that right now it's sort of the cloud is the wild, wild west. I mean, people are grabbing stuff from the cloud, and these companies have complained to you over and over again. I testified with a couple of these executives, and I was really sort of shocked by the desperation in their voices. They were saying, we need your help. We need you to come in and give us something here so that we can say no.
Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Professor, censorship isn't just done willy-nilly. There's always
finish your memo.
A purpose, an objective, some kind of motive for why some people want other people to not be able to speak. Is that fair?
Yes. I mean, the government often says that it's neutral in targeting people, but it's still a content-based decision. And yeah.
And I would just say, it might sometimes that motive be political.
It can be, yes.
Yeah, it seems to me that's what happened. I want to go to, I mean, we saw this 10 years ago, 12 years ago when the IRS was targeting people of one political persuasion, limiting their free speech rights. I think we've seen it now with what the Twitter files have exposed. I really like the term you used in your op-ed, and I think you may have said it today or someone said it earlier when you're talking about this agency principle, this censorship by surrogate, and how dangerous that can be. And I think you said in a, maybe I got this from your op-ed earlier, but you said it's one thing if Mrs. Smith calls up Twitter and says, I don't like what Mr. Jones is saying about me or whatever. It's an entirely different matter when it's the United States government telling Twitter, we got concerns about these specific accounts, which we know is what happened, again, based on the Twitter files.
Yeah, it does irk me to see people say, well, you know, the United States government was just acting like any citizen. The United States government isn't any citizen. The FBI isn't your neighbor. The FBI has subpoena authority. They have search authority. They have weapons. They're the largest law enforcement agency in the United States. So when they perform this task, it's different. There's lots of things that are more menacing when done by the government. That's one of the reasons the court has allowed for this type of agency relationship to trigger things like the First Amendment or the Fourth Amendment. And this is not a new problem. In the Fourth Amendment area, it was an old technique for officers to get private security or to get campus police or others to conduct a search. And the court said, look, if they're doing that at your direction or your behest, those are agents as well.
Yeah, it's menacing when it's done by the government. It's even more menacing when it's done by the federal government. And that's what we have here. We have the FBI. I think Mr. Armstrong made a great point when he said, okay, if parents are doing some things wrong at the local level, then local law enforcement will handle that. It's an entirely different matter when you set up a federal apparatus where neighbors can report their neighbor or people can report someone in their community to the federal government. And we know, again, from whistleblowers, over 24 parents had an FBI agent visit them, come see them, call them on the phone, investigate them based on that process that was put in place. I want to go to the fundamental question. Why is the government, in the case of the Twitter files, why is the FBI sending a list of accounts and names to Twitter, telling Twitter, we think these accounts violate your terms of service? That's sort of the fundamental question. Why in the world are they doing that? That, to me, is When you use the term wrong in your opening statement, you've used the term menacing a number of times in today's questioning. That to me is as scary as it kind of gets.
Well, it is interesting. In the Twitter files, that was the same question that a Twitter executive said. At one point, he said, what gives? I mean, basically, the FBI is telling us that our terms of service are violated by all of these people. What's their role? Essentially, what is our role? And it was an honest moment. And that same question, I think, is reflected where even Jim Baker yesterday has said, I think we might need legislation, that I think that there is a need, given what has happened, to limit the FBI and other agencies.
So whenever someone on Twitter who worked for the FBI says that, would you describe that as would you use the term targeting? Would you use the term weaponization of that process we just talked about?
Well, there's no question that they're targeting posters. They're sending the names and accounts for Twitter to take action on. And by the way, this idea that, well, Twitter could say no, that's not the standard under these tests. I gave you the 4 tests that the courts use. You can say no and still be an agent overall in that relationship.
Yeah, and as you point out in your testimony, your written testimony, this targeting is not just limited to what we've learned in the Twitter files, not just this direct attack on the First Amendment. We've seen it in we saw it with the dossier. We've seen it with the treatment of classified documents. You referenced that, the different standards. You referenced that in your statement. And of course, we've seen it with the school board situation. I got just 20 seconds. I'll maybe pose a quick question to Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, the opening statement, there's been a lot of talk about the memorandum from Attorney General Garland on October 21st, 2021. The opening statement, he says, the very first sentence, in recent months, there has been a disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, threats of violence against school administrators. And when he testified on October 21st, 2021, we asked him, what was the basis, what was the evidence for that statement? Do you remember what the Attorney General said?
Sir, I don't. I don't work for the Justice Department anymore. Didn't advise him on it.
Well, I'll remind you. He said it was the letter from the National School Boards Association. Now, do you happen to know what the National School Boards Association did with their letter, what they said about their letter after the Attorney General testified?
Sir, I do not.
They rescinded it. They said, we regret and apologize for the letter. So the basis for the targeting action involving the federal government and local school board matters, local law enforcement matters, the basis was the letter. That's what the Attorney General cited, and that letter has been pulled back, and the association who sent that letter said, we apologize and regret that we sent it. Seems to me the Attorney General should rescind his memorandum, which we've called for now for a year and a half. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. I know it was a long day, and I appreciate you staying the whole time. I was tempted to give you, I was looking to give you a restroom break, but I thought we could get through it, so I appreciate your patience and your great testimony. With that, the first subcommittee hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
That was a long one, boys and girls. Thank y'all for staying here for the full 3 hours. I appreciate you. That was crazy. What do you guys think? How are you guys feeling about it? Let's hear what everybody has to say. Hey, Tom, good to see you, man. Cynthia, what's up? Wally Tango. Is that Druken? Druken G? Drunken? Drunken G, what up, what up? Jacoby, what's up? Who else we got in here? Boondocks, what's up? Is that Asta White? I suck at spelling, sorry guys. Mark J, what up? Mr. K in the house, good to see everybody. Exit, thank you all. That was a cool website. So what's this called? This is Exit the Narrative. It's a new social media platform. You don't have a name on there, so I don't know what to call you, but Exit the Narrative. I like that. Check it out, guys. Pretty cool site. But we are now learning. There we go. But we are now learning that the FBI are part of all of this chaos during J6. Oh yeah, we're definitely learning about the truth about J6. No questions asked. I think we all understand exactly the purpose of J6. It's coming to find out that Nancy Pelosi could have called in the National Guard. She didn't. We're looking into possibly having hearings. I mean, I don't know if Nancy's going to be sober enough long enough to make out a few words, but call me Exit. You got it, Exit. hopefully we'll get Kyle Seraphin back on here in a couple days. He's supposed to be on Tucker's show tonight, so make sure you guys swing over there and check it out. I'm very excited. I think it's going to go on at 8 p.m. I don't know what time they'll bring Kyle on, but that's very, very exciting. Mystic Rick has loads of knowledge to drop. Yeah, man, that video you sent me is wild. Wild. Everything over there on Rumble is where it's at. Like, if you want to find out the truth about what's going on here, we do our best to put it out on YouTube, but it's almost unbelievable. I have a good video coming out on, we can launch it right now, actually. We'll launch it right after this stream ends. Let me get it set up for you guys. I got a really good video on the Biden business dealings in China. So this video is going to be really good. So over the last, I don't know, couple years roughly, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 years, I think as far back as they went, the Biden family, and this is just what they can prove, there is a paper trail of $31 million that was paid to Hunter and Joe Biden together. So I'm going to schedule that out. We'll schedule it at, schedule that here. Let me stay on here for another 5 minutes. We'll schedule it at 4:30. So we'll hang out for another 15 minutes, and then we'll jump in that premiere together. I'll share it here with you guys. Throw some music on for us so we can chat. Have any music to put on here? Sorry, guys. Just gonna have to deal with me. Wild. Yo, Surfing Wyoming, good to see you. Folk TV, thank you for signing back up. All the members, I appreciate y'all big time, big time. Congratulations on winning that $75, Mr. K. You know what's funny, Wish Martinez, is the classified documents and everything that's in Hunter Biden's laptop not only connects the Bidens to what's going on in China, but it also connects the George Soros funded foundations. And that's what you hear. That's what you heard Matt Gaetz call that guy out today for being a lobbyist for Pfizer and a lobbyist for Google. The George Soros foundations and the organizations that he runs basically. So if there's a presidential race, if I were to donate 5, 10, maybe even 15 to $25 million, I couldn't make an impact on a political race because the amount of donations that come in to fund political campaigns are in the billions of dollars. But when we're talking about a DA, like a district attorney, a local judge in a community, that can be bought with about $50,000. I forget the exact amount that they said, but it was like right around, I want to say 50,000, or say, you know, somebody like George Soros that donated $100 million to the Democratic campaigns, you know, $50,000, nothing. So for him to donate $50,000 to get a judge, and they were implying that, like, it doesn't matter what city, what town, where you live at, when it comes to like a judge or a district attorney or some lower level politicians, 50 grand is almost a guaranteed, because your opponents aren't going to raise anything close to that. And if you guys understand how business works, it's all about whoever can afford to spend the most at business to buy the customer. Whoever can afford to spend the most to buy a customer wins at business every time, which means if I can outspend you, if me and you are both selling the same exact cell phone or the same exact phone case for an iPhone, and I have the ability to run 5 times more ads than you, I'm going to outsell you hand over fist. Why? Because we're selling the exact same product. So all I have to do is put my product in front of yours, and then just based off the amount of people clicking on it, if I'm always before your product, I'm going to outsell you. And I can even be more expensive than you, and I'm still going to outsell you. And that's how, I mean, that's obviously how politics work now. I think a majority of these politics, it's, hey, let me donate money to your campaign, and then when you get elected in office, I need you to pass this. I need you to push these regulations through. I need you to make sure that I don't get regulated in this area. And that's what our government's done with all these unelected bureaucrats. Like the SEC being a perfect example. The SEC is supposed to be what, quote unquote, regulating crypto. Did they regulate crypto? No, they didn't. It's the exact same card that they played with nuclear power. Nuclear power would have wiped out fossil fuels off the face of the planet, right? And same with like all this solar power and wind power. It's nothing compared to nuclear. And nuclear is like 1,000 trillion times more cleaner. And the amount of people that have died, I want to say in Like the amount of people that got killed by an icicle falling off your roof and hitting you in the head, more people died from icicles falling off their roof during winter than have been killed from nuclear explosions. And that even includes the world wars. So like nuclear power is super safe, it's super clean. And the only reason that we're going to nuclear now is because Bill Gates has enough money to be building a nuclear power plant in America. So keep that in mind. Bill Gates is literally putting a nuclear power plant in America. And now we're going to go green again. We're going to go back to nuclear power. It blows your mind how corrupt this system is, how rotten from the core it is. And it all stems back to George Soros, which stems back to the Obama days, which stems back to now the Biden days, and then the Hunter Biden laptop, which all comes full circle when you're talking about Ukraine, George Soros, Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's brothers. I mean, you couldn't make this up. And the WEF is unelected, and they are hijacking the whole world. And what's funny, Sue, did you see the redacted video that actually showed where what's the leader of that, Klaus Schwab's, where he was born? So I want to say Klaus Schwab's father was born in Germany in I want to say 1890, 1892. Which would have put, if you just figured he probably had his son Klaus. I know Klaus is what, 83 right now, 84? So that means he was born probably would that put him in the 60s? So it was our CIA that helped build the World Economic Forum, that helped put Klaus Schwab's as the main guy, the head of the World Economic Forum. That's all been by our CIA's doing. And now our CIA was involved with the whole pipeline. Did you guys see that? Let's throw this clip up here. If you guys didn't see the Tucker clip from last night, we got about 10 minutes before you got to switch off. I mean, this is the biggest. I mean, the United States has created the biggest environmental terrorist attack in the history of the world, blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. And that Nord Stream pipeline has released more emissions and more toxins into the air than anything. Airbnb goes full North Korea. I don't want to get the stream throttled, so I'll save that for next time, because every time I pull something up here from somewhere else, YouTube demonetizes my video. I think I made it through a full stream this time without getting demonetized, which might be the first time, and I can't tell you how long. Yeah, the CIA was built with the Nazis after World War III or World War II. Yeah, exactly. The CIA has been the most rotten, corrupt government organization, and anybody that's tried to oppose it or take it down has disappeared. So, I mean, just to think about what Trump is fighting for and what these few last political, and then another Republican got killed last night. I forget who it was. Somebody posted it on, I shared it on Twitter. So anytime anybody shares anything, so if you guys aren't following me on Twitter, my link's obviously right down there at the bottom of the screen. Goes straight to the murder. Yeah, JFK. Isn't that crazy? United States, seems like we're going to look back and realize that the United States was the bad guy in a lot of this. And it's so bad, it's almost like they're trying to take out anybody who's trying to expose it, but there's just too many paper trails now. There's too much evidence out there. There's too many journalists that are working on different stories, and it's all coming full circle. I think Biden's days are numbered in office. I would say that he doesn't make it another 6 months. I don't think the American people are going to sit by. The only reason I think they're sitting by right now is it's too cold out, because we need to organize in areas and locations like DC where it's pretty cold right now. So if we're going to be out there for 2 or 3 days, I mean maybe even a week. I mean, I've been to some of the big Black Lives Matters protests, and it was hot out. And even at night, I mean, it got freaking freezing. That was in the middle of summer. So I could only imagine what it would be like out there when it's freezing cold and you got to go to the bathroom outside and you're surrounded by, I mean, I think when people start to march in the United States, I think the entire country is going to shut down. I really do. I think when the first protests start to get Trump back in office and get rid of Biden, I literally think our entire country is going to march. I think people are going to stop their jobs. I think the entire country is going to shut down like it did on COVID. Because once one person starts seeing it, it's going to be like Freedom for Convoy. where literally our entire country's like, it's everybody has to play their part. So as soon as they start to go, I know I'm leaving. The second I hear about it, I'm gone. I'm joining the protest peacefully. And that's the main part. We have to make sure that, and I think we saw with like the feds infiltrating, like how they did on J6, that we need to make sure that we're all locked there together in arms, just like Freedom for Convoy, super peaceful. You know, even a place where it's, you know, I wouldn't bring my son, but you know, it has to be a safe, peaceful place. So we need to make sure that we're united on that front, saying, hey, this is peaceful. And anybody that tries to make it not peaceful, they're obviously a Fed. And that can be the only message, and we have to keep it peaceful because they're going to try to use every power that they have to tear us apart and to stop that movement. They will deflect by replacing Biden via scandal. You know, Wally, I would have thought so. But why hasn't it been done already? Like, you can't tell me that they don't have the evidence. I mean, this stuff would be like a slam dunk for any attorney. Talking about demonetization, can you get demonetized? Oh yeah, you can, Mark. Absolutely. My channel's already been demonetized. I mean, not 100%, but I mean, yeah, it's not good. Since I started posting Trump content, I've lost about $3,000 to $4,000 a month, give or take. Really bad. And I'm getting an extra, what is it? I'm getting roughly an extra 20 million views extra a month. And I lost about $3,000 a month, somehow like that. And they won't send me a 100K plaque either, because I posted a short of Andrew Tate talking about why it's smart it's a smarter investment to invest in Bitcoin than it is to invest in a house. And this was at like the peak of the housing market bubble. This is crazy. It won't send me a 100K plaque because I posted dangerous content. It was literally a 30-second short of Andrew Tate just ranting about, you know, looking for other investments outside of, you know, the stock market. Yeah, gained 70K subs in 100 days, and they won't even recognize it. Yep. And doing it on 3 channels now too. I got 3 channels going. Well, my 3rd channel's not going that fast, but my main 2 are. Yep, Never Again is happening now. 5-part series, new on children's health defense. I mean, this is a full-out attack on all Americans. It's an attack on, mainly, they're trying to destroy religion, you know, and the nuclear family. The idea of, I mean, they've done a great job at it. The fact that we let this happen, and the fact that people like Laura Loomer were deplatformed, and the entire GOP sat by and didn't say a word about it or barely mentioned it, and we watched what happened to Laura, and then all of a sudden it started happening to other Republicans, and all of a sudden now it's a problem. No, the first time it happened to Laura, every single politician should have been standing up screaming from the top of their lungs that this is unacceptable and we're not going to accept it. They let it slide by, they let it slide by, they let it slide by, and then they deplatformed Trump. If that wasn't a big enough like eye-opener for everybody, exactly what they did to Nixon, Wally. Yep, it's exactly what they did to Nixon. Yep, Nixon VP was replaced with Ford before they took Nixon out with Watergate. The same blueprint. I put a couple shorts out on that. I think they actually might be launching this week, Wally, on my 2nd channel. A lot of them on the Nixon stuff. That really blew my mind. Hillary was part of it. She was fired way back. She was fired way back then for being too corrupt. Most people don't even know that. You know, that's funny, Rick. I heard that. Oh yeah, Ryan. Ryan says I have almost no views. It's literally impossible. And what's funny is, you know, even if you understand the algorithm, right? It's engagement, watch time percentage, click-through rate. Really important to have a high click-through rate, but I think that like I've had some of my best, what I thought were my best thumbnails, and I've had people like sending me DMs like, dude, your thumbnails are freaking on point right now. Like, they're really good. And I'll look at my statistics and be like a 3.5, which is just horrible. If you don't have a 5% click-through rate, you're probably not going to get outside of like your local audience. You got 5 subscribers. They average is about 20 to 30%, give or take. So to get outside of like your normal zone of your current subscribers watching your content, it's really hard to get outside of that if you can't get your click-through rate above 5%, which is so crazy because I don't know how to explain it. We just need to have like an oversight committee that's even harder. So like, say you put like somebody in charge of monitoring social media platforms. What's stopping the social media platforms from just buying those people off? And that's where we kind of are going to run into a very dangerous position here in a very short period of time. Yeah, YouTube decided that an Andrew Tate video was dangerous. This Twitter case is very important. Very, very important. Thumbnails are the most important part, but like I said, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. All right, so we got about 2 minutes, so this video is going to start here. If you guys want to come and join us, I'd really appreciate it if you guys would stick around and watch this video. It's going to start in 60 seconds. I think is going to be the one that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden business partners in China exposed. So I'd appreciate it. Thank you guys all for hitting that like button and joining me. And I'm going to try to be live for all these hearings. So if you guys want to watch these hearings and you enjoy listening to it and seeing what's going on, please come join us. I appreciate everybody. Congratulations, Mr. K and everybody.